At 12:07 a.m., Daniel Hayes made a decision that would unravel everything he'd built. The phone glowed in the darkness of his bedroom. A number he didn't recognize, a voice he'd never forget. "Please," she whispered. "I need you." He should have said no. Single fathers don't make midnight house calls. But something in her desperation, or maybe his own loneliness, made him reach for his toolbox instead of common sense. 30 minutes later, he stood in a mansion that cost more than he'd earn in a lifetime, watching a woman who had everything, except what she really needed. Before we dive into this story, I want to invite you to stick around until the very end, because what starts as a simple repair call becomes something neither of them could have predicted. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday night, turning the streets of Portland into rivers of reflected neon and headlight blur. Daniel Hayes sat in his aging Ford F-150, engine idling outside a 24-hour diner on Morrison Street, finishing the last of a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until his self-imposed curfew, the invisible line he'd drawn 3 years ago when his world had collapsed and he'd had to rebuild it from scratch. His daughter Sophie was 8 now, 8 years old and already too smart for her own good, with her mother's dark curls and his stubborn chin. She was asleep in their small 2-bedroom apartment 15 minutes away, watched over by Mrs. Chen from 4B, who charged $20 for overnight sitting and always left the kitchen cleaner than she'd found it. Daniel paid her $40 anyway, because kindness was a currency he understood. The phone buzzed against his thigh. He almost didn't look. Almost. The number wasn't saved in his contacts, a Portland area code but unfamiliar. For a moment, his finger hovered over the decline button. Nothing good came from unknown calls after midnight. Bill collectors didn't work this late, neither did anyone else he wanted to hear from. But something made him answer. Maybe it was the way the phone buzzed with an urgency that felt different from robocalls and spam. Maybe it was the fact that he'd been sitting in this truck for 20 minutes, unable to shake the feeling that today had been too easy, too routine, and life had a way of balancing those scales. "Hayes Plumbing," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Silence on the other end. Not the empty silence of a dropped call, but the weighted silence of someone gathering courage. "Hello?" He tried again. "Mr. Hayes?" The voice was female, cultured, with the kind of careful enunciation that came from expensive schools and boardrooms. But beneath the polish, he heard something else, a tremor, barely there. I'm so sorry to call this late. I know it's completely inappropriate, but I didn't know who else to—" "Ma'am, slow down," Daniel interrupted gently, years of customer service kicking in automatically. "What's the emergency?" Another pause. He could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, like she was trying to calm herself. "I have a leak," she finally said. "Under my kitchen sink. It's everywhere. I've tried to stop it, but I don't know what I'm doing, and the water just keeps coming, and Her voice cracked, just slightly. "I can't call anyone else. Not at this hour. Not for something like this." Daniel glanced at the clock. 11:51 p.m., 9 minutes. He should have said no. Should have told her to shut off the main water valve and call back in the morning when his rates were half what he'd have to charge for an emergency midnight call-out. Should have stuck to his rules, the ones that kept his life organized and his daughter's routine stable. "What's the address?" he heard himself say instead. She gave it to him. A street name in the West Hills that made his eyebrows rise. The houses up there didn't just have price tags, they had pedigrees. Old money, new tech fortunes, the kind of neighborhood where the gardeners drove nicer trucks than he did. "I can be there in 30 minutes, he said, already shifting the truck into drive. "But ma'am, at this hour, I have to charge emergency rates. I don't care about the cost," she cut in, and there was something fierce in her voice now, replacing the tremor. "Just please come, please." The line went dead. Daniel sat there for a moment, phone still pressed to his ear, rain drumming on the roof of his truck. Every instinct he'd honed over 3 years of single parenthood screamed that this was a bad idea. Midnight calls to rich neighborhoods, a woman's voice, desperate and alone. The setup for complications he didn't need. But he was already pulling out of the parking lot, already turning toward the hills where the city lights grew sparse and the trees grew thick. Rules were important, They kept chaos at bay, but so was paying the rent. The house wasn't what he expected. Daniel had done calls to the West Hills before. Sprawling estates with circular driveways and water features, homes that looked more like museums than places people actually lived. But this one was different, smaller, though still easily worth $2 million. Modern, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, tasteful landscaping that looked professionally maintained but not showy. The porch light was on, a warm glow that cut through the rain. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw her silhouette in one of those windows. A slim figure, motionless, watching. He grabbed his toolbox from the truck bed, hunched his shoulders against the downpour, and ran for the covered entrance. Before he could knock, the door opened, and Daniel Hayes, who prided himself on maintaining professional composure in any situation, felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, but not in the way of magazines or movie screens. Mid-30s, maybe, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was coming loose. She wore black yoga pants and an oversized gray sweater that hung off one shoulder, and her feet were bare against the hardwood floor. No makeup, eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying or fighting not to. But it was the look in those eyes that stopped him, a mixture of relief and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Mr. Hayes," she said, stepping back to let him in. "Thank you for coming. I'm Evelyn Carter." The name meant nothing to him, but he nodded, wiping his feet on the mat even though he was already dripping on her floor. "Just Daniel is fine. Where's the leak?" "Kitchen. This way." He followed her through a living room that belonged in an architecture magazine. Minimalist furniture, abstract art on the walls, a fireplace that looked like it had never been used. Everything was pristine, perfectly arranged, utterly impersonal, like a showroom instead of a home. The kitchen was a different story. Water pooled across the marble floor, spreading from beneath the island where the sink was. Evelyn had thrown down towels, expensive-looking towels, but they were already soaked through, dark and heavy with absorbed water. "I turned off the valve under the sink," she said, hovering near the entrance like she was afraid to step into the flood. "Or at least, I tried to, but it won't stop." Daniel set down his toolbox and knelt by the island, ignoring the cold water seeping through his jeans. He opened the cabinet door and shone his flashlight into the space beneath the sink. The problem was immediately obvious and immediately strange. The valve she'd turned was the right one. The water should have stopped, but the fitting above it had cracked, probably from age or pressure, and water was spraying from the fracture in a thin, persistent stream. A 15-minute fix, maybe 20. Simple enough that he almost felt guilty about the emergency rate he'd quoted. "I can handle this," he said, glancing back at her. "But I need to shut off your main water. Where's your utility room?" I don't know." She looked embarrassed, wrapping her arms around herself. "I've only lived here 6 months. I haven't really—" "Basement? Garage?" "Garage, probably. Through there." She pointed to a door on the far side of the kitchen. Daniel found the main shut off easily enough. The garage was as immaculate as the rest of the house. Her Mercedes parked with military precision, everything labeled and organized. He turned the valve, listened for the water to stop flowing, then headed back inside. Evelyn hadn't moved. She stood in the doorway, watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Not threatening exactly, but focused, like she was studying him. "You can relax," he said, pulling out his pipe wrench. "This won't take long." "I'm not good at relaxing." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, there and gone. Daniel got to work, letting the familiar rhythm of repair settle over him. Unscrew the damaged fitting, clean the threads, apply fresh plumber's tape, install the new piece he kept in his truck for exactly this kind of situation. Simple, mechanical, fixable. While he worked, he could feel her presence behind him. Not hovering, not asking questions, just there. In his peripheral vision, he saw her lean against the counter, arms still wrapped tight around her middle. "Can I ask you something?" Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Sure." "Do you always answer calls this late?" Daniel paused, considering the question. "No," he admitted. "Almost never." "Then why tonight?" Why indeed? He'd been asking himself the same thing since he'd pulled out of that parking lot. "You sounded like you needed help," he said finally, fitting the new piece into place with steady hands. "And I'm in the business of helping people." "That's it? Just Professional courtesy? There was something in her tone that made him look back at her. She was watching him with those dark eyes, and he realized with a start that she wasn't asking about plumbing. She was asking something deeper, something he didn't have an answer for. Sometimes people need help at inconvenient times, he said carefully. Doesn't make the need any less real. Evelyn nodded slowly, processing this. You're right. It doesn't. Silence fell between them, filled only by the sound of metal on metal as Daniel tightened the connections. He tested the fit, checked for weaknesses, then stood and brushed off his knees. Let me turn the water back on and make sure it holds. He went back to the garage, twisted the main valve open, and heard the water pressure surge through the pipes. Back in the kitchen, he checked under the sink. Dry, no leaks, clean repair. You're all set, he said, closing the cabinet door. That fitting was old, probably original to the house. Should be good now for another decade at least. That's it? Evelyn looked almost disappointed. That's it, like I said. Simple fix. And the cost? Daniel did the math in his head. Emergency call-out, late hour, parts and labor. $250 should cover it. She didn't even blink, just walked to the counter, pulled out her phone, and a moment later his own phone buzzed with a payment notification. $300. You overpaid, he said. You came at midnight in the rain. I underpaid. Her tone left no room for argument. Daniel packed up his tools slowly, aware that this was the moment he should leave. Job done, payment received, professional distance maintained. But something kept his feet planted on that marble floor. Can I ask you something now? He said. Evelyn tilted her head. Fair's fair. Was it really just about the leak? The question hung between them, dangerous and honest. For a long moment she didn't answer, just looked at him with those dark, tired eyes, and he saw the mask slip, just for a second, revealing something raw underneath. No, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Wasn't. The admission should have sent him running, should have triggered every warning bell his therapist had helped him install after the divorce. Instead, he found himself setting down his toolbox. What was it about? Evelyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. Would you believe me if I said I don't know? That I heard the water running and I panicked, and the only thing I could think was that I didn't want to be alone in this house tonight, dealing with it by myself? I'd believe you. Would you? She pushed off from the counter, took a step toward him, not close, but closer. Because I'm not sure I believe myself. I'm Evelyn Carter. I run a company with 3,000 employees and $1 billion valuation. I've negotiated with venture capitalists and hedge fund managers. I've given keynote speeches to auditoriums full of people. And tonight, I fell apart over a broken pipe. Daniel heard the self-recrimination in her voice. The anger turned inward. He recognized it because he'd felt it himself in those first months after his wife left. The fury at his own weakness, at needing help, at being unable to hold everything together through sheer force of will. It's not about the pipe, he said gently. It never is. Her eyes met his, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Two people standing in a too-big kitchen at 1 a.m, both pretending their lives were more together than they felt. No, Evelyn agreed. It's not. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Daniel knew he should leave. Knew that whatever this moment was, it lived in the space between professional and personal, and crossing that line was a complication neither of them could afford. But he also knew what loneliness looked like, had lived with it for 3 years, worn it like a second skin. And he recognized it in her, standing barefoot in her pristine kitchen, hugging herself like she might fall apart if she let go. Do you want me to go? He asked quietly. Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, looked away, then back at him. I don't know, she admitted. I called you because I needed help. And you came, and you fixed the problem, and now you should go, and I should be fine. That's how it works, right? Problems have solutions. Solutions have endings. In plumbing, maybe. But not in real life? Not usually, no. She smiled again, sad and knowing. I'm being completely inappropriate. You came here to fix a sink, not to whatever this is. You're not being inappropriate. You're being honest. Daniel picked up his toolbox, felt its familiar weight. And honesty is not something to apologize for. Even when it's messy? Especially then. Evelyn walked him to the door, maintaining that careful distance between them. On the threshold, with rain still falling and curtains beyond the porch light, she stopped him with a hand on his arm. Just briefly, just enough to make him turn. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the sink, for understanding." Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Because he did understand, maybe too well. Understood the desperation that made you call strangers at midnight. Understood the fear of being alone in a house that didn't feel like home. Understood the need for someone, anyone, to see past the carefully constructed facade and acknowledge the mess underneath. "If you have any other problems," he said, hating how the words came out, "you have my number." It was a professional courtesy, a standard line he gave to all his customers. They both knew it was more than that. "I do," Evelyn said softly. "I'll keep that in mind." Daniel drove home through the rain, his hands tight on the wheel, trying not to think about the way she'd looked standing in that doorway, trying not to think about the loneliness in her eyes, or the fact that it mirrored his own. When he got back to the apartment, Mrs. Chen was asleep on the couch, and Sophie was dreaming peacefully in her bed, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Daniel stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, letting the simple reality of his daughter's presence anchor him back to what mattered. This was his life. This was what he'd built from the wreckage of his marriage. Order, routine, boundaries. He couldn't afford to blur them for a woman with sad eyes and a flooded kitchen. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the rain, he couldn't stop replaying the moment she'd admitted it wasn't about the pipe. Couldn't stop hearing the vulnerability in her voice when she'd said she didn't want to be alone. His phone sat on the nightstand, dark and silent. He told himself he was relieved she hadn't called again. He told himself a lot of things that night. None of them felt true. 3 days passed. Daniel fell back into routine. Morning drop-off at Sophie's school, service calls, lunch from food trucks, more calls, evening pickup, homework help, dinner, bedtime stories. The rhythm of single parenthood unchanged and unchanging. He told himself he'd forgotten about Evelyn Carter and her pristine house and her midnight confession. Told himself it had been a momentary blip, a strange encounter that meant nothing in the larger scope of his carefully managed life. Then his phone rang at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, and her name appeared on the screen. He stared at it for 3 rings, his heart doing something complicated in his chest, before he answered. "Hayes Plumbing." "Daniel?" Her voice sounded different in daylight, more controlled, more like the CEO she'd mentioned. "It's Evelyn Carter. I'm sorry to bother you again, but I think I might have another issue." "What kind of issue?" A pause. "The dishwasher isn't draining properly. I've tried running it twice, but the water just sits there." It was a reasonable problem, a normal service call. Except for the fact that her voice had that same careful quality it had held when she'd called at midnight, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed. "I can swing by this afternoon," Daniel said, checking his schedule. "I have an opening around 4. Would that work?" "That would be perfect. Thank you." She hung up before he could respond, leaving him staring at his phone and wondering what he was getting himself into. But the house looked different in daylight, less like a sanctuary and more like what it was, an expensive piece of real estate in a neighborhood where homes were investments, not havens. The landscaping was immaculate, the windows sparkled, and a cleaning service van was parked in the driveway when he pulled up. Evelyn answered the door in business attire this time. Charcoal gray suit, white blouse, heels that put her almost at eye level with him. Her hair was up, her makeup perfect, and she looked every inch the billionaire CEO she'd claimed to be. But her eyes were the same, tired, guarded, lonely. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside. Professional, distant. "The dishwasher's this way." The cleaning crew was working in the living room, 2 women with efficient movements and Spanish radio playing from a phone. Evelyn led Daniel to the kitchen. The same kitchen where they'd stood 3 nights ago, though the floor was now dry and gleaming. "I appreciate you fitting me in," she said, gesturing to the dishwasher. "I know you must be busy." "It's my job." "Of course. Your job. Something flickered in her expression, there and gone. Daniel knelt in front of the dishwasher, opened it, and immediately saw the problem. Or rather, saw that there wasn't one. The dishes inside were clean and dry. No standing water, no drainage issue. He looked up at her, and her eyes met his with a challenge in them, daring him to call her out, to acknowledge what they both knew. "Run it for me," he said instead. "Let me see what's happening." Evelyn closed the dishwasher, pressed the buttons, and it hummed to life. Water flowed, sprayers rotated, everything functioned exactly as it should. They stood there in silence, listening to the machine work perfectly, while the cleaning crew's radio played softly in the next room. "Seems to be working fine now," Daniel said finally, standing up. Yes, I suppose it is." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself again, that same defensive posture from the other night. "Maybe I just needed to run it one more time." "Maybe." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Daniel knew he should make an excuse and leave. Knew this wasn't about plumbing, hadn't been from the start. "Why did you really call me?" he asked quietly. Evelyn looked away, toward the windows where afternoon light streamed through expensive curtains. "I don't know. I told myself it was the dishwasher, but—" She trailed off, shook her head. "This is stupid. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have wasted your time." "It's not a waste if you needed—" "What?" She turned back to him sharply. "What did I need, Daniel? Someone to fix a problem that doesn't exist? Someone to make me feel less alone in this house for 20 minutes? Her voice had risen, angry now, though he sensed the anger was directed at herself more than him. "Yes," he said simply. The words stopped her. She blinked, the anger draining away as quickly as it had appeared. "Yes? Sometimes people need that. There's no shame in it." Evelyn laughed, but it sounded broken. "You don't understand. I'm not supposed to need things like that. I built a company from nothing. I've been on the cover of Fortune magazine. I've given TED Talks about resilience and leadership and finding strength in adversity. And here I am, making up plumbing emergencies because I can't stand how quiet this house gets." Daniel set down his toolbox. "You want to know what I think?" "I'm not sure I do." "I think you're human, and I think you've spent so long being strong for everyone else that you've forgotten it's okay to be weak sometimes." He paused. "I think you're lonely, and I think you recognized that in me the other night. And that's why you called." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're lonely too." "I'm a single dad who works 70 hours a week so I can pay rent and give my daughter a stable home. I haven't had a real conversation with another adult in months that wasn't about pipe fittings or parent-teacher conferences. So yeah, I'm lonely too." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Evelyn's expression softened, and for the first time since he'd arrived, her shoulders relaxed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "about your daughter's mother." "I'm not. The divorce was the best thing that could have happened. Daniel meant it too. But that doesn't make it easy." "No, I suppose it doesn't." One of the cleaning crew women appeared in the doorway, said something in rapid Spanish. Evelyn responded in the same language, fluent and easy, and the woman nodded and disappeared. "They're finishing up," Evelyn explained. "I told them they could leave early." Which meant they'd be alone in the house soon. The thought should have sent Daniel heading for the door. Instead, he found himself asking, "How long have you lived here?" 6 months. I bought it after the Series C funding closed. Figured I should have something to show for all those 90-hour weeks." She gestured around the kitchen with a bitter smile. "Turns out real estate doesn't keep you warm at night." "Neither does plumbing." She laughed, genuine this time, and the sound transformed her face, made her look younger, less guarded. "No, I suppose it doesn't." The cleaning crew left a few minutes later, their van pulling away and leaving Daniel's truck alone in the driveway. Evelyn walked to the window and watched them go, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I should let you get back to work," she said, but she didn't turn around. "I should get going," Daniel agreed, but he didn't move. The moment stretched, fragile and dangerous. Every instinct Daniel had told him to leave, to maintain the professional distance, to keep his life simple and uncomplicated. But his feet stayed planted on that marble floor, and his eyes stayed fixed on her reflection in the window. "Evelyn, don't." She finally turned, and her expression was fierce. "Don't say whatever you're about to say. Don't tell me this is a bad idea or that we're crossing lines we shouldn't cross. I know that. You know that. We both know exactly what this is. And what is it? Two lonely people who should know better. She took a step toward him. Two people who've spent so long being responsible and strong and together that they've forgotten what it feels like to just be. Another step. She was close now, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that made him think of boardrooms and power lunches and a life so far removed from his own, it might as well be on another planet. I can't offer you anything, she said quietly. I work 16-hour days. I travel constantly. My life is board meetings and investor calls and putting out fires. I don't have time for relationships or commitments or anything resembling normal. I'm not asking for that. Then what are you asking for? It was a fair question. Daniel didn't have an answer. Didn't know what he wanted from this woman who called him at midnight and made up plumbing emergencies. Didn't know what he could offer her when his own life was held together with duct tape and determination. Honestly, he said, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just here. Evelyn studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, she said, you're here, and I called you because I didn't want to be alone. And neither of those things has to mean anything more than that. Doesn't it, though? Not if we don't let it. But even as she said it, Daniel could see the lie in her eyes, could feel it in the way the air between them had changed, becoming something charged and inevitable. He should leave, should walk out that door and drive back to his daughter and his simple life and never look back. Instead, he asked, "When's the last time you ate?" The question clearly surprised her. I don't remember. Lunch, maybe? Yesterday? I haven't had dinner. And I know a place that does the best pho in Portland. It's not fancy, he added quickly, seeing her expensive suit, her designer shoes. But it's real food and the owner's a friend, and you look like you could use a meal that doesn't come from a delivery app. Evelyn blinked at him. Are you asking me to dinner? I'm suggesting we both need to eat, and eating alone is depressing. Call it whatever you want. For a long moment, she didn't respond, just stood there in her immaculate kitchen in her power suit, looking torn between desire and caution. I'll need to change, she said finally. I'll wait. She disappeared upstairs and Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, wondering what the hell he was doing. This wasn't smart. This wasn't part of the plan. This was exactly the kind of complication he'd spent 3 years avoiding. But when Evelyn came back down 15 minutes later in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders and her face free of makeup, she looked so much more real than she had before. So much more like someone he could actually know, instead of some untouchable CEO. Ready? She asked. No, Daniel thought. Not even close. Yeah, he said. Let's go. The pho place was a hole in the wall on Southeast Division, tucked between a laundromat and a tattoo parlor. The sign out front flickered in Vietnamese and English, and the windows were steamed from cooking broth. Daniel had been coming here for 2 years, ever since Sophie declared it her favorite restaurant in the world. Evelyn looked at the exterior with something like amusement. This is your idea of dinner? Best broth in the city, trust me. Inside, the owner, a tiny Vietnamese woman named Mai, who had to be at least 70, practically tackled Daniel with a hug that barely reached his chest. Danny, where you been? Sophie okay? Why you not bring her? The questions came rapid fire, in accented English punctuated with concern. Sophie's fine, Mai. She's at her friend Emma's house tonight. Girls-only movie marathon. Good, good. She growing so fast. Mai finally noticed Evelyn hovering behind him, and her eyes went wide. Oh, you bring lady friend. This is good. About time. Mai, this is Evelyn. Evelyn, Mai. Mai grabbed Evelyn's hand and shook it enthusiastically. Very pretty. You take good care of Danny, okay? He worked too hard, too skinny, needs to eat more. Evelyn looked simultaneously charmed and overwhelmed. I'll do my best. Mai seated them at a corner booth, brought tea without asking, and disappeared into the kitchen shouting orders in Vietnamese. The restaurant was half full, mostly locals who knew Mai and her husband Duke made everything from scratch and never skimped on the meat portions. She's intense, Evelyn said, wrapping her hands around the teacup. She basically adopted me and Sophie after the divorce. Wouldn't let us pay for meals for the first 6 months. Daniel smiled at the memory. Said we were family now, and family doesn't charge family. That's beautiful. That's Mai. He watched Evelyn look around the restaurant, the mismatched furniture, the faded photos of Mai's family in Vietnam, the handwritten specials board. Not what you're used to, I'm guessing. No, but that's not a bad thing. She met his eyes across the table. I eat most of my meals at my desk or in conference rooms. Everything tastes the same after a while. She gestured around, this feels real. Before Daniel could respond, Mai returned with 2 enormous bowls of pho, the broth still bubbling, the smell of star anise and ginger and beef filling the air. She set them down with the reverence of someone presenting artwork. You eat, she commanded, pointing at both of them. All of it. You too skinny, you too skinny. She didn't discriminate in her assessment of their body types. I bring you extra meatballs. She bustled off before they could protest. Evelyn stared at her bowl like she wasn't quite sure where to start. Daniel handed her chopsticks, showed her how to add the bean sprouts and basil and lime, then demonstrated the proper technique for eating noodles without splashing broth everywhere. For a while, they just ate. The food was as good as Daniel had promised, rich and complex and comforting in the way only homemade soup could be. He watched Evelyn take her first real bite, saw her eyes close in appreciation, and felt an unexpected surge of satisfaction. Okay, she admitted, this might actually be the best pho I've ever had. Told you. They fell into easy conversation then, safer topics than loneliness and midnight phone calls. She told him about her company, a software platform that helped healthcare providers coordinate patient care. He told her about Sophie's obsession with marine biology and her insistence that they visit every aquarium within a 3-hour drive. She sounds wonderful, Evelyn said softly. She is. She's everything. Daniel meant it with every fiber of his being. Some days I have no idea what I'm doing as a parent, but then she'll say something or do something that makes me think maybe I'm not completely screwing it up. I think the fact that you worry about screwing it up means you're probably doing better than you think. Maybe. He twirled noodles around his chopsticks. What about you? Any kids? No, Evelyn looked down at her bowl. I was engaged once, in my 20s. We had plans, marriage, house, kids, the whole package. Then I started the company, and suddenly I was working 100-hour weeks, and he wanted someone who could be home for dinner and plan vacations and fit into his vision of what life should look like. We broke it off before the wedding. I'm sorry. I'm not. At least I tell myself I'm not. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I built something instead. Something that matters. That helps people. That's worth something, right? Of course it is. Then why does it feel like I traded one thing for another? Like I chose success over everything else? And now I'm 36 years old, living in a house that doesn't feel like home, eating dinner alone 6 nights a week, and calling plumbers at midnight because I can't stand the silence? The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months, years maybe. Daniel recognized the release of pressure, the relief of saying out loud what you'd been thinking in the dark. You didn't trade one for another, he said carefully. You made choices based on what you knew at the time. We all do. And if they were the wrong choices, then you make different ones going forward. He set down his chopsticks. Evelyn, I was married to a woman I thought I loved. We had a daughter together, bought a house, planned a future. And then one day she told me she'd been unhappy for years and wanted out. Wanted to find herself, whatever that meant. She moved to California with her new boyfriend and sees Sophie twice a year if we're lucky. That's awful. It was. For a while. But you know what? It forced me to figure out who I was without her. Forced me to build a life that actually worked instead of one that just looked good from the outside. He paused. So yeah, maybe you made choices that got you here, but here doesn't have to be the end of the story. Evelyn absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. Is that what this is? The start of a different story? I don't know what this is. Neither do I. But it feels like something. Yeah, Daniel agreed quietly. It does. Mai returned to clear their bowls, both scraped clean, and tried to force dessert on them despite their protests. They compromised on Vietnamese coffee to go, sweet and strong enough to power them through the rest of the week. Outside, the Portland evening had turned cool, the earlier rain giving way to clear skies and stars. They stood by Daniel's truck, neither quite ready to leave. "Thank you," Evelyn said, "for this, for treating me like a normal person instead of whatever it is people usually treat me like." "What do they usually treat you like?" "A title, a bank account, a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be exploited." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "You're the first person in months who's just talked to me." Daniel knew he should say something about how that would change now. How tomorrow they'd go back to their separate lives, her to boardrooms and him to clogged drains, and this would become a strange interlude they'd both remember but never acknowledge. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'm glad you called. Both times." Even though there was nothing wrong with the dishwasher? Even though... As Evelyn stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "This is a bad idea, isn't it? Whatever this is." "Probably. You have a daughter, I have a company. We live in completely different worlds." "We do. And yet here we are." "Here we are," Daniel echoed. For a moment he thought she might kiss him. Thought he might kiss her. The space between them felt electric with possibility, dangerous with implication. But instead she just smiled, sad and knowing and beautiful. "Good night, Daniel Hayes." "Good night, Evelyn Carter." He watched her walk to her Mercedes, watched her drive away into the Portland night, and told himself this was it, the end of whatever brief connection they'd found. His phone buzzed before he'd made it home. A text from an unknown number that he immediately recognized as hers. The dishwasher's making a weird noise again. He laughed, actually laughed out loud in his truck, and typed back, "What kind of weird noise?" "The kind that means I'll need to call a plumber." "When?" "Tomorrow?" "Day after." "Whenever you have time." Daniel sat in his driveway, Sophie asleep inside with Mrs. Chen watching TV, and stared at those words. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was a mistake, that he was opening a door he might not be able to close. But rationality had never made him feel less alone. He typed, "I'll check my schedule and let you know. Thank you." A pause, then another message appeared. "For everything." Daniel didn't respond, just sat there with his phone in his hand, wondering what the hell he'd just started and knowing with absolute certainty that he wasn't going to stop. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed. Some connections, once made, changed everything. And as he finally went inside to relieve Mrs. Chen and check on his sleeping daughter, Daniel Hayes realized his carefully ordered life was about to become very, very complicated. He couldn't wait. The pattern established itself with deceptive ease over the next 2 weeks. A text would arrive, always during business hours now, always with a plausible excuse. The garbage disposal hummed strangely. The shower pressure seemed low. The toilet in the guest bathroom ran constantly. Daniel would schedule her in between other calls, drive up to the West Hills, and spend an hour fixing problems that ranged from legitimately broken to completely imaginary. They never mentioned the faux restaurant, never acknowledged that these appointments were anything more than professional transactions, but the pretense grew thinner with each visit. On the 5th call, a supposedly leaking faucet that was bone dry when he arrived, Evelyn didn't even try to maintain the charade. She just handed him a cup of coffee and said, "I know, I'm pathetic." "You're not pathetic," Daniel said, setting down his untouched toolbox. "You're lonely. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, calling a plumber to my house 5 times in 2 weeks just so I have someone to talk to seems pretty pathetic." They were in her living room this time, the space still pristine and impersonal despite her months of living there. Daniel had noticed that nothing changed between visits. No new books appeared on the shelves, no mail piled up on the counter, no signs that a person actually inhabited these rooms. It was like she existed here as a ghost, passing through but never settling. "When's the last time you talked to a friend?" he asked. Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Define friend. I have colleagues, business contacts, people who want favors or funding or access to my network. Does that count?" "You know it doesn't." "Then the answer is, I don't remember. Before I started the company, maybe. Back when I had time for things like friendships and hobbies and a life outside of board meetings." She sank onto the designer couch that looked like it had never been sat on. I used to have friends, Daniel, real ones. Women I'd known since college, people who knew me before I was anyone important. And then I got busy, and they got busy, and suddenly it's been 3 years since we've talked, and I wouldn't even know what to say anymore. Daniel sat down across from her, maintaining the careful distance they'd both been observing. So call them, and say what? Hi. I know I've been a terrible friend who never returned your calls or showed up to your wedding or remembered your birthday, but I'm lonely now, so let's grab coffee. That ship has sailed. Maybe. Or maybe they're lonely too. Evelyn looked at him with those dark, tired eyes. Is that what you tell yourself? That everyone's lonely, so it's okay that you are? The question hit harder than she probably meant it to. Daniel thought about his own isolation, the way he'd let friendships drift after the divorce, too proud to admit he needed support, too focused on building a stable life for Sophie to maintain connections that required effort and vulnerability. Sometimes, he admitted, other times I just try not to think about it too hard. And does that work? Not really, no. They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon light slanting through those expensive windows, illuminating dust motes that shouldn't exist in such a carefully maintained space. I'm using you, Evelyn said quietly. You know that, right? I'm paying you to come here and listen to me complain about problems that aren't actually problems. I'm wasting your time and your skills because I can't figure out how to have a normal human connection. You're not wasting anything, and you're not using me. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I come here because I want to, because talking to you is the most interesting part of my week, because for an hour or two, I get to be someone other than Sophie's dad or the guy who fixes toilets. Who do you get to be? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring that out. Evelyn's expression softened. That's the first completely selfish thing I've heard you say. Is it? Everything else is about your daughter or your work or helping other people. But that, wanting something for yourself, that's different. Daniel hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. His entire life since the divorce had been structured around responsibility and duty and making sure Sophie never felt the lack of stability he'd felt growing up. Wanting something just for himself felt foreign, almost dangerous. Maybe I'm using you too, he said. For what? To remember what it's like to want something, to feel something other than tired or worried or adequate. He met her eyes. You make me feel awake, Evelyn. Like I've been sleepwalking through my life and suddenly someone turned the lights on. The words hung between them, heavier than anything they'd said before. This wasn't safe conversation anymore. This was admission, acknowledgement. The thing they'd both been dancing around since that first midnight phone call. Evelyn stood abruptly, walked to the window, put distance between them. We should stop this. Probably. I'm going to stop calling you with fake plumbing emergencies. Okay? And you're going to stop coming here. If that's what you want. She turned and her expression was fierce. It's not what I want. That's the problem. I want you to keep coming here. I want to keep making up excuses to see you. I want to blur every line we've drawn and pretend like it doesn't matter. Like we're just two people who enjoy each other's company and nothing has to be complicated. It doesn't have to be. Yes, it does. You have a daughter, Daniel, a life, responsibilities, and I have a company that requires every ounce of energy I have. We don't have room for this, whatever this is. Daniel stood, crossed the room to where she stood by the window, not touching, not close enough to break the carefully maintained boundary, but close enough that he could see the conflict in her eyes. Then what do you want to do? He asked quietly. I don't know. I've spent my entire adult life making decisions, weighing options, calculating outcomes, but this? I have no idea what to do with this. Neither do I. They stood there, trapped between wanting and wisdom, neither willing to take the step that would change everything, and neither able to walk away. Evelyn's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. She glanced at it, and Daniel saw her expression shift. The vulnerable woman disappearing, the CEO sliding back into place like armor. I have a call in 10 minutes, she said, her voice different now, professional, distant. With investors in Singapore, I should... Yeah, of course. But Daniel grabbed his toolbox, grateful for the excuse to move, to break the tension. I'll let myself out. Daniel? He stopped at the door, looked back. Thank you, she said. For being honest. For not pretending this is something it's not. What is it? I don't know, but it's not nothing. Daniel drove away from her house that afternoon with the certainty that he wouldn't hear from her again, that she'd meant it when she said they should stop, that whatever fragile connection they'd built would end now, before it became something neither of them could control. 3 days passed, then 4. His phone stayed silent except for normal work calls and Sophie's school sending reminders about field trip permission slips. He told himself it was for the best, that Evelyn had made the smart choice, that going back to his routine was what he needed, but the routine felt emptier now. The conversations with customers felt more hollow. Even Sophie noticed something was off. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked one night over dinner. Spaghetti, her favorite, though she'd barely touched it. "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Why?" "You seem sad, like when you and Mom first split up." The observation from his 8-year-old cut deep. Daniel had worked so hard to shield her from his emotions, to be present and positive and stable no matter what he was feeling inside. "I'm not sad," he said, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Work's been busy." Sophie studied him with eyes too knowing for her age. "It's okay to be sad sometimes, Dad. You tell me that all the time." "You're right. I do." He reached across the table, squeezed her hand. "I guess I need to take my own advice." "Is it about a girl?" Daniel nearly choked on his water. "What? No, why would you?" "Emma's mom says you need to start dating, that it's not healthy for you to be alone all the time." Sophie twirled spaghetti around her fork with studied casualness. "I told her you go on dates sometimes." "Sophie, do you go on dates?" This was not a conversation Daniel had been prepared to have tonight. Or ever, really. The idea of explaining his complicated non-relationship with Evelyn to his daughter was surreal. "I've had dinner with someone a few times," he said carefully, "but it's complicated." "Because of me?" "What?" "No, sweetheart, never because of you." "Then why is it complicated?" How did he explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes adults meet each other at the wrong time, in the wrong circumstances, and want things they can't have? That loneliness made people do stupid things like fall for people they'd never actually be able to build a life with. "Because grown-up relationships are complicated," he said finally. "Even when people care about each other, sometimes things just don't work out." Sophie considered this, her face serious. "Do you care about her?" "Yeah," Daniel admitted. "I do." "Then you should tell her, before it's too late." "It might already be too late, baby. Mom always said you gave up too easy." Sophie took a bite of spaghetti, apparently done with the conversation. "I think you should fight for the things you want." Daniel sat there, stunned by his daughter's wisdom and stung by the truth of it. When had he become someone who let things slip away without trying? When had caution become cowardice? That night, after Sophie was asleep, he pulled out his phone and stared at Evelyn's contact. His thumb hovered over her name for a full minute before he forced himself to put the phone down. She'd been clear they were stopping this, and he needed to respect that, even if every instinct screamed at him to call her. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., jerking him awake from the edge of sleep, Evelyn's name on the screen. His heart hammered as he answered. "Daniel?" Her voice was different, ragged, shaky. "I'm sorry to call so late. I know we said we wouldn't, but I didn't know who else." "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." A shuddering breath. "I just got back from New York. Red-eye flight, meetings all day tomorrow, and I walked into this house and I can't do it anymore. Can't keep pretending I'm fine. Can't keep acting like this is enough." Daniel was already getting dressed, pulling on jeans with one hand. "I'm coming over." "You don't have to "I'm coming over. Unlock the door." He made the drive in 20 minutes, breaking every speed limit. Her house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen. The door was unlocked as promised. He found her sitting on the kitchen floor, still in her business suit, shoes kicked off somewhere. Mascara streaked down her face. She looked completely undone, completely real. "I'm sorry," she said as he sat down beside her on the cold marble. "I'm so sorry. I promised myself I wouldn't do this, wouldn't call you, wouldn't drag you into my mess. I'm here because I want to be." "Why? Why would you want to be here with me like this? I'm a disaster. I run a $1 billion company and I can't even handle coming home to an empty house without falling apart." Daniel didn't answer with words, just pulled her against him, let her curl into his side, felt her shoulders shake with sobs she'd probably been holding back for months. Years, maybe. They sat like that for a long time, her crying into his shirt while he held her and stroked her hair and didn't say any of the platitudes people usually offered. Sometimes there were no words that helped. Sometimes you just needed someone to witness your breaking. Eventually, the tears slowed. Evelyn pulled back, wiped her face with her hands, leaving dark smudges. "I look terrible," she said. "You look human." "That's what I'm afraid of." She laughed wetly. "Everyone expects me to be strong all the time. Evelyn Carter, the woman who built a company in a male-dominated industry, the CEO who never shows weakness, the leader who has all the answers." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "But I don't have the answers, Daniel. I don't even know the questions anymore." "What happened in New York?" "Nothing. Everything. The usual." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around them. "We're looking at acquisition offers, companies that want to buy us out, and everyone's treating it like this huge success, this validation of everything we've built. But all I could think during the meetings was, is this it? Is this what I sacrificed everything for? To sell the company I poured my life into so some venture capitalist can make a profit? Do you want to sell? I don't know. The money would be substantial, life-changing, never have to work again kind of money. But then what? What do I do with the rest of my life if I'm not building something?" Daniel understood that fear. After his divorce, he'd thrown himself into work because at least plumbing made sense. Pipes broke. You fixed them. Simple. Clear. Unlike relationships or feelings or figuring out who you were when everything you'd built your identity around disappeared. "You build something else," he said. "Something for yourself this time. Not for investors or employees or anyone else. Just for you." "Like what?" "I don't know." "What did you want to be before you became CEO Evelyn Carter?" She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I wanted to be a doctor, a pediatrician specifically. I loved kids, loved the idea of helping them, making them feel safe." A sad smile. "That was before I took a computer science class sophomore year and fell in love with coding instead. One decision, and my whole life went a different direction. It's not too late to go back. I'm 36, Daniel. I can't just go to medical school now." "Why not?" Because... She trailed off, apparently unable to come up with a good reason. "Because that's not how life works." Says who? You've already proven you can build something from nothing. If you wanted to become a doctor, you could do it. Might take longer, might be harder, but you could. Evelyn leaned her head back against the cabinet, stared at the ceiling. "Sometimes I forget that possibilities exist, that I'm not locked into this path I chose 20 years ago." "We all forget that sometimes. Even you?" "Especially me." Daniel stretched out his legs, his back starting to ache from sitting on the hard floor. "I tell myself I'm doing everything for Sophie, and that's true. But it's also an excuse. An excuse not to want more, not to take risks, not to do anything that might disrupt the carefully controlled life I've built." "Is that what I am? A risk?" He looked at her. Really looked at her. Mascara streaked and exhausted and more beautiful than she had any right to be sitting on a kitchen floor at midnight. "Yeah," he said honestly, "you're the biggest risk I've taken in years, and it terrifies me." "Me too." She shifted closer, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I don't know what I'm doing, Daniel. I don't know what this is or what I want it to be or how it could possibly work. I just know that when I'm with you, I feel less alone. And that scares me more than any board meeting or investor pitch ever has. Because feelings are messier than business. Because feelings can hurt you in ways business never can." Daniel understood that too. His ex-wife's departure had taught him exactly how much damage another person could do when you let them matter. How trust could be shattered and confidence destroyed and your whole sense of self could crumble because you'd built it around someone who decided they didn't want to stay. But sitting here with Evelyn, feeling the warmth of her against his side, he realized something else. Isolation hurt too. Maybe not as dramatically, but just as deeply. The slow erosion of going through life without real connection, without someone who saw you, was its own kind of destruction. "I don't have answers either," he said. I don't know how this works with my daughter and your company and the fact that we live in completely different worlds. But I know that when you called tonight, I didn't hesitate. Didn't think about complications or consequences. Just knew I needed to be here. But that's not very logical. No, it's not. I built my whole career on logic, on data and analysis and making rational decisions. And how's that working out for your personal life? Evelyn laughed, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen. Point taken. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the house settling around them with small creaks and sighs. Daniel found himself noticing details he'd missed before. A plant on the windowsill that was clearly dying from neglect. A stack of mail on the counter that hadn't been opened. The absence of any personal photos or mementos. This wasn't a home. It was a place she stored her body between obligations. Come here more often, he said suddenly. What? The house. You said you can't handle coming home to it, so don't. Or at least change what home means. He gestured around the sterile kitchen. This place doesn't feel lived in because you don't actually live in it. You exist in it. There's a difference. I don't have time to make time. Even small things. Buy real groceries and cook yourself dinner sometimes. Put up photos. Get furniture that doesn't look like it belongs in a showroom. Hell, get a dog or a cat or something that makes it feel less empty. I travel too much for a pet. Then hire a dog walker or a cat sitter or just do something that makes this place yours instead of just another obligation. Evelyn turned to look at him, and something shifted in her expression. You're good at this. At what? Seeing what people need, taking care of them. It's easier with other people than with myself. Isn't it always? She stood, offered him her hand. He took it, let her pull him to his feet. They stood facing each other in the kitchen, her hand still in his, neither of them pulling away. I should go, Daniel said, though he made no move toward the door. You should, Evelyn agreed, not releasing his hand. Sophie's with Mrs. Chen, but I don't like being gone too long. Of course not. And you have meetings tomorrow. You need sleep. I do. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, hands linked, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Daniel, don't. He squeezed her hand gently. Don't say whatever you're about to say. Not tonight. Tonight, let's just let this be what it is. And what is it? Two people who aren't alone, even if it's just for a little while. Evelyn's eyes glistened, fresh tears threatening. That's enough, isn't it? For now? Yeah, it's enough. He left a few minutes later, driving home through quiet streets with the feeling of her hand still warm in his. Mrs. Chen was asleep on his couch again, and Sophie was dreaming peacefully, and his life was exactly as he'd left it. But something had shifted. Some line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. His phone buzzed as he was getting ready for bed. A text from Evelyn. Thank you for coming, for not making me feel pathetic. He typed back, You could never be pathetic, just human. Is there a difference? Only in your head. A long pause, then, The bathroom faucet is dripping, nothing urgent. But if you have time this week, Daniel smiled at his phone, knowing exactly what she was really asking. I'll check my schedule. Probably can fit you in Thursday afternoon. Thank you. Evelyn? Yes? Buy a plant. A real one. Something that needs taking care of. Why? Because taking care of something other than work might be good practice. For what? For letting someone take care of you. The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, okay, I'll try. That's all anyone can do. He fell asleep that night with his phone on his chest, feeling more settled than he had in weeks. Whatever this thing with Evelyn was, complicated, messy, probably doomed, it was also real. And after 3 years of going through the motions, real felt like oxygen. Thursday came with Portland's typical autumn rain, the kind that soaked everything and turned the city gray. Daniel finished his morning calls early and headed up to the West Hills with his toolbox and a strange nervousness in his chest. Evelyn answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose, minimal makeup. And on the kitchen windowsill, clearly visible from the entrance, sat a small potted succulent in a bright blue ceramic pot. You bought a plant, Daniel said. I bought a plant. She looked almost shy about it. The woman at the nursery said succulents are hard to kill. Seemed like a good place to start. It's perfect. The faucet did actually drip this time. A worn washer. Easy fix. But Daniel took his time with it, and Evelyn sat at the counter watching him work, and they talked about nothing important. Sophie's upcoming science fair project, a new restaurant Evelyn wanted to try. The rain, casual conversation, normal conversation, the kind two people have when they're comfortable with each other. When he finished, she handed him coffee that she'd actually made in her own kitchen instead of grabbing from a coffee shop. Small progress, small changes. Can I ask you something? She said as he packed up his tools. Always. Do you ever regret it? Your marriage, I mean. Not Sophie. I know you'd never regret her. But the whole thing, the commitment. Letting someone in that far. Daniel leaned against the counter, considering the question. Sometimes, when I'm feeling sorry for myself or when the loneliness gets bad. But mostly no. Because even though it ended badly, there were good years too. And I learned things about myself, good and bad. You can't regret experiences that shape you, even the painful ones. But you're careful now, guarded. Aren't you? Carefully guarded might be my defining characteristic, she said with a rueful smile. But with you, I don't want to be. And that's terrifying. For me too. So what do we do about it? Daniel set down his coffee cup, moved closer to where she sat. Not touching, but close enough to feel the heat of her, the pull that had been there since that first midnight call. We take it slow, he said. We don't make promises we can't keep or pretend this is something it's not. We just see where it goes, day by day. No expectations? No expectations, just honesty. Evelyn nodded slowly. I can do honesty, even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. She slid off the stool, and suddenly they were face to face, close enough that he could count the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, close enough that closing the distance would take nothing at all. I want to kiss you, she said quietly. I've wanted to since the faux restaurant, maybe since the first night you came here. I know. But I'm afraid if I do, this becomes real. Not just conversations and fake plumbing problems, but actual feelings that can actually hurt. It's already real, Evelyn. The kissing won't change that. Won't it? Daniel reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face. Just his fingertips against her cheek, feeling the softness of her skin and the slight tremor that ran through her at the contact. The only thing that changes, he said softly, is whether we're honest about what we want. But we can't unhappen what's already happened, can't unfeel what we already feel. Evelyn closed her eyes, leaned into his touch. When she opened them again, there was resolve there along with the fear. Then I want to be honest, she whispered. I want you. I want this. Whatever it is. Whatever it becomes. And that terrifies me more than anything in my life ever has. Me too. Daniel leaned in slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, giving her every chance to change her mind, to pull back, to maintain the safety of distance. She didn't pull back. Their lips met softly at first, tentative and questioning. Then Evelyn made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like relief and hunger and coming home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. So that happened, he said. That happened. Evelyn's voice was shaky. And we can't take it back. Do you want to? No, but I should want to. This is complicated, Daniel. You have Sophie. I have the company. We barely know each other. We know enough. Do we? He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I know you're lonely and brilliant and scared of being vulnerable. I know you call plumbers at midnight when you can't stand being alone. I know you built something extraordinary but forgot to build a life. I know that when you let your guard down, you're the most real person I've met in years. He paused. Is that enough? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. It shouldn't be. By any logical measure, it shouldn't be enough. And yet it is. She laughed through the tears. We're both complete idiots, you know that? I'm aware. This is going to be a disaster. Probably. We should walk away right now, before it gets worse. We should, Daniel agreed. Neither of them moved. Instead, Evelyn kissed him again, harder this time, with a desperation that spoke of months, maybe years, of holding everything in. Daniel responded in kind, his hand sliding into her hair, pulling her closer, letting himself feel everything he'd been carefully not feeling since that first night. They stumbled backward until Evelyn's back hit the kitchen counter, their mouths never separating, both of them crossing every line they'd drawn with deliberate, reckless abandon. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, Evelyn's lipstick was smeared and Daniel's shirt was half untucked, and the careful distance they'd maintained had evaporated like rain on hot pavement. "We should talk about this," Evelyn said, but her hands were still fisted in his shirt, not letting go. "We should," Daniel agreed, even as he pressed kisses along her jaw, down her neck, feeling her pulse jump beneath his lips. "Define boundaries. Set expectations." "Absolutely." His hands found the hem of her sweater, slipped beneath to touch warm skin, and she inhaled sharply. "Daniel, tell me to stop." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, his own pupils blown wide with want. "Tell me this is too fast, too complicated, too everything. Tell me to leave and I will, right now, no questions asked." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, weighing risks and consequences the way she probably analyzed business decisions, calculating outcomes, measuring potential damage against potential reward. Then she reached up, cupped his face in both hands, and said with absolute certainty, "Don't you dare stop." What happened next wasn't gentle or careful or hesitant. It was raw need and suppressed longing, and two people who'd been pretending they didn't want each other finally admitting the truth. They made it upstairs somehow, Evelyn leading him by the hand through the house he'd visited a dozen times, but never seen beyond the first floor, into a master bedroom that was as impersonal as the rest of the house, except for the unmade bed, the only sign that she actually slept here. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like her expensive detergent, and something uniquely Evelyn, both breathing hard, both acutely aware that they'd just fundamentally changed whatever this was between them. "Well," Evelyn said finally, staring at the ceiling, "we really committed to making this complicated, didn't we?" Daniel laughed, the sound surprising him. "No half measures." "Apparently not." She turned her head to look at him. "I should probably feel regretful right now, or worried, or something other than satisfied." "Should I be insulted that you only feel satisfied?" "You know what I mean." She poked him in the ribs. "I just slept with my plumber, a man I've known for less than a month, a man with a daughter and a life I know almost nothing about. This is wildly irresponsible." "Is it? We're both consenting adults." "You know it's more complicated than that." Daniel did know. Knew that Sophie would have questions if this continued. Knew that Evelyn's world of board meetings and billion-dollar deals had no space for a divorced plumber from Southeast Portland. Knew that what they'd just done had taken this from theoretical possibility to concrete reality, and reality was harder to walk away from. But lying here with her, feeling more present in his own body than he had in years, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn asked quietly. "That I should probably feel guiltier than I do." "Same, although I don't have a daughter to consider." She paused. "How does that work? With Sophie, I mean. Do you tell her about people you're seeing?" "I don't know. I've never been in this situation before." Daniel turned on his side to face her. "Since the divorce, there's been no one. A couple of first dates that went nowhere. Nothing worth mentioning to an 8-year-old. And this is worth mentioning?" The question hung between them, loaded with implication, because mentioning it to Sophie meant this was real. Meant it wasn't just physical release or temporary comfort. Meant they were actually trying for something. "I don't know yet," Daniel said honestly. "Do you want it to be?" Evelyn closed her eyes. "I want things I have no right to want. I want you to stay here tonight even though you can't, because you have a daughter waiting at home. I want to wake up next to you tomorrow even though I have a 7 a.m. conference call. I want this to be simple when everything about it is impossibly complicated. So we figure it out together. You make it sound easy. It won't be. But most worthwhile things aren't." She opened her eyes, and there was vulnerability there that made Daniel's chest ache. "What if we can't? Figure it out, I mean. What if my work and your responsibilities and the reality of our lives means this is just temporary? Then it's temporary, and we'll deal with that if it happens. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But deciding it's doom before we even try seems like a waste of something good. Something good, Evelyn repeated. Is that what you think this is? Don't you? She was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Yes. Terrifyingly, stupidly good, which makes the potential for disaster that much greater. Daniel understood the fear, had felt it himself every time he thought about what would happen if this fell apart, and he had to explain to Sophie why someone else had left. But fear couldn't be the only factor in decisions, or you'd never do anything. I have to go, he said reluctantly, checking the time on his phone. Almost 6. Sophie would be home from Emma's house in an hour, and he needed to be there. But I don't want you to spiral into worst-case scenarios while I'm gone. I spiral. It's what I do. But, she smiled as she said it, spiral if you have to. Just remember this was your idea too. Both of us walked into this with our eyes open. My eyes were closed, actually, during the good parts. Daniel laughed and kissed her, slow and deep, then forced himself out of bed before he could change his mind about leaving. He got dressed while she watched from under the covers, looking thoroughly rumpled and more beautiful than she had any right to be. Text me when you get home, she asked as he headed for the door. I will. Take care of that plant. The plant is fine. I meant it as a metaphor. I know what you meant. She threw a pillow at him, which he dodged with a grin. The drive home felt surreal. Daniel kept glancing at his reflection in the rearview mirror, expecting to look different somehow after what had just happened. But he looked the same. Just a guy in a work shirt driving a beat-up truck through Portland traffic. No visible signs of the seismic shift that had occurred in the past few hours. Sophie was already home when he arrived, Mrs. Chen having let her in with the spare key Daniel provided for emergencies. Dad, you're late, Sophie called from the living room where she was sprawled on the couch with her homework. Mrs. Chen had to leave for her book club. Sorry, sweetheart. Last job ran long. The lie tasted bitter, but what was he supposed to say? Sorry I'm late. I was sleeping with someone I probably shouldn't be sleeping with? It's okay. I finished my math already. She held up her worksheet proudly. Want to check it? Daniel spent the rest of the evening in comfortable routine, checking homework, making dinner, listening to Sophie chatter about Emma's new puppy and the upcoming school play auditions. Normal, grounding, real. But his phone buzzed twice during dinner with texts from Evelyn, and each time his heart jumped in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. First text. You made it home safe? Second text. The plant is still alive. I'm taking that as a positive sign. He waited until Sophie was in the shower to respond. Safe and sound. And keeping a plant alive for 6 hours doesn't count as success yet. Baby steps. How are you doing? A long pause, then confused, scared, happy. All of the above. Same. Is that normal? I think so. I'm not exactly an expert. Neither am I. We're quite the pair. Daniel smiled at his phone, then typed, Get some sleep. That conference call comes early. You remembered? I remember everything you tell me. That's dangerous. Probably. But I'm starting to think dangerous might be worth it. He could see her typing, stopping, typing again. Finally, me too. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Evelyn. The next week passed in a strange blur of normal life, punctuated by stolen moments. Daniel saw Evelyn 3 times, once for an actual plumbing issue when her water heater started making concerning noises, once for lunch at a small cafe far from both their usual neighborhoods, and once when she texted him at 10 p.m. with no excuse at all, just, Can you come over? And he'd found Mrs. Chen and driven to the West Hills without hesitation. They talked more than they touched, though there was plenty of that too. Daniel learned that Evelyn had a younger brother who worked in renewable energy and called her twice a year to ask for money, that she'd been a competitive swimmer in college, that she'd once turned down a job at Google because she wanted to build something of her own, that her favorite movie was The Princess Bride and she'd seen it 17 times. Evelyn learned that Daniel had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes until he'd aged out at 18, that he'd learned plumbing from a man named Joe who'd given him a chance when no one else would and had died of a heart attack 3 years ago. That Sophie's middle name was Grace, after Daniel's foster mother, who'd actually tried to make him feel like he belonged. That he still had nightmares sometimes about not being enough for his daughter. "You're more than enough," Evelyn said fiercely when he admitted that last part. They were in her living room, on that pristine couch that was finally starting to look lived in, with the addition of throw blankets and the coffee table book she'd left half open. "She's lucky to have you. Most days I'm not sure I believe that." "Then believe me when I tell you, I've seen men with all the money and privilege in the world fail their children spectacularly. You show up every day. You put her first. You're teaching her what love looks like." Evelyn took his hand. "That's not nothing." Daniel squeezed her fingers, overwhelmed by the conviction in her voice. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me. Not just the plumber who fixes your sink. You never were just the plumber who fixed my sink." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You were the person who came when I called at midnight, who didn't judge me for falling apart, who made me feel less alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them pretending this could last. "I have to go to San Francisco next week," Evelyn said eventually. 3 days of meetings with potential acquirers. The board wants me to at least hear them out." "Do you want to sell?" "I don't know. The rational part of me says yes. Take the money. Declare victory. Move on to whatever's next." She paused. "But there's another part that feels like selling would mean admitting I built this company at the expense of everything else, and that makes me want to hold on to it forever out of spite." "Spite's not a great business strategy." "No, it's not." She laughed softly. "I hate that you're right. It's a burden I bear." Evelyn sat up, turned to face him. "Come with me." "What?" "To San Francisco. Come with me. I'll be in meetings most of the time, but the evenings would be free, and we could actually have dinner at a normal hour for once. See the city. Pretend we're normal people on a normal trip." Daniel's first instinct was to say no. He couldn't leave Sophie for 3 days, couldn't take time off work, couldn't justify spending money on a trip to San Francisco just to keep Evelyn company. But looking at her face, seeing the hope there mixed with fear of rejection, he found himself reconsidering. "I'd have to arrange care for Sophie," he said slowly, "and move some appointments. And is that a yes?" "It's a maybe. Let me make some calls." Evelyn's face lit up in a way he'd never seen before, unguarded and genuinely happy. She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking them both off the couch. "Thank you. Even if it doesn't work out, thank you for considering it. I haven't said yes yet, but you're thinking about it. That's enough." Daniel held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms, and wondered what the hell he was doing. 3 weeks ago, he'd been living his careful, controlled life. Now he was considering flying to San Francisco with a woman who made him feel more alive and more terrified than he'd felt in years. Sophie was the problem. Not a problem, exactly, but the factor that complicated everything. He couldn't just leave her with Mrs. Chen for 3 days. Couldn't take her along. Evelyn had business meetings, and an 8-year-old had no place in acquisition discussions. Couldn't explain to her why he'd suddenly be gone without explaining who Evelyn was and what she meant to him. And what did she mean to him? Daniel still didn't have an answer to that. Girlfriend felt too trivial for whatever this intense, complicated thing was. Partner implied something more committed than their tentative arrangement. Lover was accurate but didn't capture the emotional depth. "I can see you overthinking from here," Evelyn said, pulling back to look at him. "What's going on in that head?" "Just trying to figure out logistics." And I don't know yet. Let me sleep on it." She nodded, accepting this, though he could see the disappointment she was trying to hide. Of course. No pressure. But there was pressure. Not from her, but from his own desire to say yes, to take this risk, to see what they could be outside the confines of Portland and her house and his carefully scheduled life. That night, after he'd tucked Sophie into bed and checked on her 3 times like he always did, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his phone and his calendar and tried to make it work. Mrs. Chen could handle overnight, but 3 nights felt like too much to ask. Emma's mom had offered to help with childcare before, but he hated imposing. His friend Marcus from the Plumbers Union owed him a favor, but Marcus had 4 kids of his own. "Dad?" Sophie's voice from the hallway made him look up. She stood in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I can't sleep. Bad dreams? He opened his arms and she climbed into his lap, even though she was getting too big for it and her feet nearly touched the floor. No, just thinking. About what? You're different lately. In a good way. You smile more. You seem less tired. Daniel's heart clenched. He'd thought he was being subtle, keeping his relationship with Evelyn separate from his life with Sophie. Apparently not subtle enough. Do you want to know why? He asked carefully. Sophie nodded against his chest. I've been spending time with someone. A friend. Someone who makes me happy. A girlfriend or a girlfriend? I'm not sure yet. Something in between, maybe. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this. Is she nice? Very nice. Smart and funny and kind. Do you love her? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. Did he love Evelyn? He cared about her, that was certain. Thought about her constantly, wanted to be with her, felt more himself around her than he had in years. But love? That word carried weight he wasn't sure he was ready to bear. I don't know, sweetheart. It's still new, still figuring itself out. Mom left because she didn't love us anymore. Mom left because she didn't love herself. That's different, and she does love you. She's just not very good at showing it. Sophie lifted her head to look at him with those two wise eyes. Would this person leave? Like Mom did? Daniel wanted to promise that Evelyn would never leave, that this thing between them was solid and permanent and safe. But he'd learned the hard way that promises about other people's feelings were worthless. I don't know what's going to happen, he said honestly, but I'm trying to be careful, to make sure that whatever happens, you're okay. You're my priority, Sophie, always. But you're allowed to be happy too, Dad. You tell me that all the time, that grown-ups deserve happiness. I do tell you that, don't I? So maybe you should listen to yourself. She snuggled back against his chest. I think you should see your friend, even if it's scary, because being scared and happy is better than being scared and alone. Daniel held his daughter close, overwhelmed by her wisdom and her generosity and the fact that she was somehow trying to take care of him when it should be the other way around. When did you get so smart? He asked. I've always been smart. You just don't always notice. Fair point. They sat like that for a while, the kitchen light casting warm shadows, the house quiet around them. Finally, Sophie yawned, and Daniel carried her back to bed, tucked her in properly this time, and kissed her forehead. Dad? She murmured, already half asleep. Yeah, baby? If you want to go on a trip with your friend, Emma's mom said I could stay with them any time. They have a guest room, and Emma wants to show me her puppy properly. Daniel froze in the doorway. When did Emma's mom say that? Last week at school pickup. She said you looked like you needed a break. That single parents deserve breaks too. Did she now? Mm-hmm. So if you need to go somewhere, I'd be okay. Really okay. Daniel stood there for a long moment, watching his daughter drift off to sleep, feeling the weight of her permission settle over him like a blanket. She was giving him a gift, the freedom to choose happiness without guilt. The least he could do was accept it. He texted Evelyn from the hallway. I can come to San Francisco, if the offer still stands. Her response was immediate. It stands. Thank you. I should be thanking you for being patient while I figured things out. We're both figuring things out. That's the point. When do we leave? Monday. I'll book your flight. I can pay for my own flight. I know you can, but I want to do this. Please let me. Daniel hesitated, his pride warring with practicality. Finally, okay, thank you. Thank you for taking this chance with me. He stared at those words for a long time before responding. I'm terrified. Me too, but that means it matters, right? Yeah, it does. The weekend passed in a flurry of preparation. Daniel arranged for Sophie to stay with Emma's family, packed a bag with his least worn clothes, and tried not to think too hard about what 3 days in San Francisco with Evelyn might mean. Sophie was excited about the puppy sleepover. Emma's mom was gracious and understanding, and everything was falling into place, which was when Daniel should have known something would go wrong. Sunday evening, his phone rang with Evelyn's name on the screen. He answered expecting to hear her voice, maybe some last-minute trip details. Instead, she sounded completely different. Flat, distant, professional. Daniel, I need to cancel the trip. His stomach dropped. What? Why? It's not going to work. I've been thinking about it all weekend, and it's too much too fast. We need to slow down, put some distance between us. Evelyn, what happened? On Thursday, you were excited about this. Now I'm thinking clearly. Her voice was cold, businesslike. The CEO he'd met that first night instead of the woman who'd cried in his arms. This was a mistake. All of it. We got caught up in something that doesn't make sense, and we need to stop before someone gets hurt. Someone like who? Your daughter, my company, both of us. Daniel leaned against the wall, feeling the world shift beneath him. Talk to me. Really talk to me. What brought this on? Does it matter? Yes, it matters. 2 days ago, you were asking me to come to San Francisco with you. Now you're ending things over the phone? That doesn't make sense. Not everything has to make sense, Daniel. Sometimes people just realize they've made a mistake. Is that what I am? A mistake? Silence on the other end. Long, painful silence. Then, I called you at midnight because I was lonely and broken and not thinking straight. I kept calling you because you made me feel less alone. I slept with you because I wanted to feel something other than empty. But none of that means this could ever actually work. Each word landed like a physical blow. Daniel slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, phone pressed to his ear, trying to understand what was happening. I don't believe you, he said finally. What? I don't believe that's why you're doing this. Something happened. Something changed. And instead of talking to me about it, you're running. I'm not running. I'm being realistic. You're being scared. There's a difference. Don't tell me what I'm feeling. Anger crept into her voice now, replacing the cold distance. You don't know me as well as you think you do. Then help me understand. Tell me what's really going on. But what's really going on is that I have a board meeting tomorrow where they're going to push me to sell my company. I have 300 employees whose jobs depend on the decisions I make. I have responsibilities that don't include playing house with someone I barely know. Playing house? Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? A few weeks of pretending we could be normal people with normal lives? But we're not normal, Daniel. I'm a CEO of a billion-dollar company and you're a plumber with a daughter. We don't fit. We never did. The words struck exactly where she meant them to. Daniel felt the old insecurities rise up. Not good enough, not educated enough, not successful enough. The same feelings his ex-wife had cultivated before she'd left. You know what? He said, anger finally breaking through his shock. You're right. We don't fit, because I would never reduce someone I cared about to their job title and bank account. I would never throw their life circumstances in their face to make myself feel better about being too scared to take a risk. Daniel, no, you had your say. Now I get mine. He stood up, pacing now. You called me at midnight not because you were broken, but because you recognized something in me. Someone who understood what it was like to be lonely despite being surrounded by people. Someone who wouldn't judge you for being human. And yeah, maybe we don't make sense on paper. Maybe a CEO and a plumber shouldn't work. But we did work. We do work. And the only reason you're ending this is because you're terrified it might actually mean something. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you've built walls so high around yourself that the thought of letting someone in sends you running. I understand that you'd rather be alone and safe than connected and vulnerable. And I understand that I can't force you to take a chance on something good just because I'm willing to. The silence on the other end stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice small. You're right about all of it, but that doesn't change anything. It could. No, it can't. And now she sounded sad instead of angry. This was always going to end, Daniel. Better now than later when it would hurt even more. It already hurts. I know. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Daniel stood in his hallway holding his phone, trying to process what had just happened. Less than an hour ago, he'd been packing for San Francisco. Now he was canceled, dismissed, reduced to a mistake she wanted to correct. He should have seen it coming, should have known that something this intense couldn't last, should have protected himself better, Built his own walls, kept his distance, but he hadn't. He'd let Evelyn in. Let himself hope. Let himself imagine a future that included this brilliant, complicated woman who made him feel seen. And now she was gone. Sophie found him still standing there 20 minutes later, staring at nothing. "Dad, are you okay?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, sweetheart, just change of plans. The trip's canceled." "Oh." Her face fell. "Does that mean I can't go to Emma's?" "No, you can still go if you want. I just won't be traveling." Sophie studied his face with that uncomfortable perception of hers. "Did something happen with your friend?" "Yeah, something happened." "Did she leave? Like Mom?" The question broke something in Daniel's chest. "Yeah, baby, she left." Sophie crossed the hallway and hugged him fiercely. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm really sorry." Daniel held his daughter and tried not to let her see him fall apart, tried to be strong and stable and everything a parent should be. But inside, he was reeling. 3 weeks. That's all it had taken for Evelyn Carter to slip past every defense he'd carefully constructed and then tear herself free, leaving damage in her wake. He should never have answered that midnight call. Should never have gone back for the second visit. Should never have let himself believe that wanting something was enough to make it work. That night, after Sophie was finally asleep, Daniel sat on his bed with his phone in his hand and Evelyn's contact information pulled up on the screen. His thumb hovered over the delete button for a full minute. Then a text came through that made his heart stop. "I'm sorry. For everything. You deserved better." He stared at the message, 1,000 responses running through his head. Angry ones, hurt ones, desperate ones asking her to reconsider. In the end, he typed only, "Yes, I did." Then he deleted her number, her texts, every trace of her from his phone. If Evelyn Carter wanted to be alone, he'd give her exactly what she wanted, even if it killed him. The week that followed felt like moving through water. Daniel went through the motions, service calls, school pickups, bedtime routines, but everything had a muted quality, like someone had turned down the volume on his life. Sophie went to her sleepover at Emma's house and came back full of stories about the puppy and the pizza they'd made from scratch, and Daniel listened and smiled and felt nothing. Marcus noticed first. They were working a commercial job together on Thursday, replacing corroded pipes in an old building downtown, when his friend finally said what he'd clearly been thinking all week. "You look like hell, man." "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear." "I'm serious. You've been off all week, barely said 2 words. Almost cross-threaded that fitting 10 minutes ago." Marcus set down his wrench. What's going on?" Daniel kept working, not meeting his friend's eyes. "Nothing. Just tired." "Bullshit. I've known you for 5 years. This isn't tired. This is heartbreak." Marcus paused. "Who was she?" "Doesn't matter. It's over." "Clearly it matters, or you wouldn't look like someone ran over your dog. Come on, talk to me." But Daniel couldn't. Couldn't explain Evelyn and the midnight calls and the brief, intense thing they'd shared. Couldn't articulate how someone he'd known less than a month had managed to become so important so quickly. Couldn't admit that he'd broken his own rules about staying guarded and gotten exactly what he deserved for it. "Just someone I shouldn't have gotten involved with," he said finally. "I knew better. Did it anyway. Now I'm dealing with the consequences." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said something Daniel didn't expect. "You know what your problem is? You think wanting things is a weakness, that needing people makes you vulnerable. So you shut yourself off and call it being responsible, when really you're just scared." "That's not..." "It is. And I get it, after what your ex did. But man, you can't live your whole life afraid of getting hurt again. That's not living. That's just existing." The words hit too close to home. Daniel tightened a connection with more force than necessary, the metal protesting under his hands. "She's the one who ended it," he said. "Not me. I was willing to try. She ran." "Did you tell her that? That you were willing to try?" "I didn't get the chance. She made up her mind, and that was it. Done. Over. No discussion." "So call her. Tell her you're not done." Daniel shook his head. "She made herself clear. I'm not going to chase someone who doesn't want to be caught." "Pride's a cold companion, brother. It's better than humiliation." Marcus sighed but dropped the subject, and they finished the job in relative silence. But his words lingered in Daniel's head for the rest of the day, needling at him. Was he letting pride stop him from fighting for something that mattered? Or was he finally learning to protect himself from people who would leave the moment things got difficult? He still didn't have an answer by the time he picked up Sophie from school that afternoon. She climbed into the truck with her backpack and a paper in her hand, waving it excitedly. Dad, I got the part. What part? In the school play. I auditioned for the narrator and I got it. Ms. Henderson said I had the best projection and articulation in the whole fourth grade. Daniel pulled her into a hug, genuinely happy for her despite the weight in his chest. That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. The play's in 3 weeks. You'll come, right? You have to come. It's mandatory for parents. Of course I'll come. Wouldn't miss it for anything. Sophie beamed at him, then her expression turned more serious. Are you feeling better? You seemed really sad this week. I'm okay, just had a rough patch. But I'm better now. The lie came easily, smoothly, because what else could he say? Good. Because Emma's mom said if you ever need to talk to another adult, she's available. She said single parents have to stick together. Daniel made a mental note to thank Emma's mom for her kindness, even if the thought of talking about his feelings with a near stranger made him want to crawl under a rock. That's nice of her, but I'm fine. Really. Sophie didn't look convinced, but she let it drop, chattering instead about the play and her lines and how she wanted to practice every single day until she had it perfect. Daniel listened and responded and tried to focus on this. His daughter's joy, her excitement, the simple pleasure of watching her thrive. This was what mattered. Not a woman who'd been in his life for less than a month. Not feelings that had burned bright and fast and left him scorched. Not the ache in his chest every time he thought about Evelyn standing in her kitchen, kissing him like he was air and she was drowning. He was fine. He'd be fine. Eventually, that night, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel found himself standing in his garage staring at his toolbox. The same toolbox he'd carried into Evelyn's house that first night. The same one he'd brought on every subsequent visit, even when there was nothing to fix. His phone, the new contactless phone, sat on his workbench, silent, as it had been all week. What would he even say if he called her? That he missed her? That he thought she'd made a mistake? That 3 weeks together had felt more real than 3 years of his marriage? All of those things were true. None of them mattered if she didn't want the same things. Daniel picked up a wrench, turned it over in his hands, set it down. Picked up a screwdriver, did the same. He was reorganizing his toolbox for the third time when his phone actually rang, making him jump. Unknown number. Portland area code. For one wild, irrational moment, his heart leaped at the possibility it might be Evelyn. Then reality crashed back. She wouldn't call from an unknown number. She had his number. If she wanted to talk, she'd just call. He answered anyway. Hayes Plumbing. Mr. Hayes, this is Catherine Wu. I'm the CFO of Carter Technologies. A woman's voice, crisp and professional. I apologize for calling so late, but I'm trying to reach you regarding a somewhat urgent matter. Daniel's blood ran cold. Carter Technologies, Evelyn's company. What kind of matter? It's regarding Evelyn Carter, our CEO. I understand you've worked with her recently on some home repair issues? The careful phrasing told Daniel this woman knew exactly what kind of work he'd been doing. He felt his jaw tighten. I did some plumbing work for Ms. Carter, yes. Is there a problem? Mr. Hayes, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve that much. Evelyn's been not herself this week. She's missing meetings, making uncharacteristic decisions, and generally acting like someone who's having some kind of breakdown. And when I finally cornered her and demanded to know what was going on, the only thing she would say was that she'd made a terrible mistake. Daniel's heart was pounding now. I don't understand what this has to do with me. I think you do. Because when I asked her what mistake, she pulled up a photo on her phone. A photo of a wrench. Your wrench, I assume, based on the company name visible on the handle. The image hit Daniel like a freight train. Evelyn had kept a photo of his wrench, had looked at it enough that her CFO knew about it. Ms. Wu, with all due respect, I don't think Evelyn would appreciate you calling me. She ended things. She made that very clear. She's also miserable and stubborn and convinced she did the right thing even though she's obviously falling apart. Catherine's voice softened slightly. Look, I've known Evelyn for 8 years. I've seen her handle hostile takeovers and board revolts and competitors trying to destroy her company. I've never seen her like this. not over business. This is personal. Why are you telling me this? Because someone needs to. Because Evelyn would never admit she made a mistake, even when it's destroying her. And because I saw that photo, Mr. Hayes. I saw the way she looked at it. Whatever happened between you two, it mattered. It still matters. Daniel leaned against his workbench, trying to process this. Evelyn was falling apart. Over him. The thought seemed impossible and inevitable all at once. She told me it was a mistake, he said quietly, that we didn't fit, that I was just a way to feel less lonely. She's a liar, a brilliant, successful, terrified liar who would rather blow up something good than risk getting hurt. Catherine paused. The board meeting is Monday, the one about the acquisition. She's going to kill the deal, turn down $800 million because she says the company is all she has left and she's not giving it up. That's her choice to make. It is. But it's not the choice she wants to make. It's the choice someone makes when they're trying to punish themselves for being human. Daniel closed his eyes, seeing too clearly the spiral Evelyn was in, pushing him away, clinging to her company, choosing isolation over vulnerability because at least isolation was familiar. What do you want me to do about it? He asked. I want you to decide if you're willing to fight for her, because she won't fight for herself. She'll just keep making decisions that protect her from getting hurt while slowly destroying everything that could make her happy. She doesn't want me. She made that clear. She's scared. There's a difference. Catherine's voice was firm. And I know it's not fair to put this on you. I know she's the one who ended it, and you have every right to walk away. But I also know that sometimes people who are drowning need someone to pull them out of the water, even when they're fighting the rescue. Daniel thought about Evelyn crying on her kitchen floor, admitting she didn't want to be alone. Thought about the way she'd kissed him, like he was saving her life. Thought about the plant on her windowsill, and the gradual softening of her defenses, and the terrified hope in her eyes when she'd asked him to San Francisco. He thought about his own daughter's words. Being scared and happy is better than being scared and alone. Where is she right now? He asked. At the office. She's been here since 6 this morning, preparing for Monday. I expect she'll be here until midnight at least. Text me the address. Does that mean? It means I'm going to talk to her. That's all I can promise. That's more than enough. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Catherine hung up, and a moment later Daniel's phone buzzed with an address downtown. He stood there staring at it, warring with himself. Every instinct for self-preservation told him to delete the text and go to bed, to let Evelyn make her own choices and live with the consequences, to protect himself from someone who'd already hurt him once. But a louder voice, one that sounded suspiciously like his daughter, told him that some things were worth fighting for. Even when the fight was hard, even when the outcome was uncertain, even when it terrified him. Daniel grabbed his keys and headed for his truck before he could change his mind. The Carter Technologies building was sleek glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed success and innovation. The lobby was empty except for a security guard who looked up when Daniel entered. Help you? I'm here to see Evelyn Carter. The guard's eyebrows rose. It's almost 9 p.m. Miss Carter doesn't take visitors this late. Tell her Daniel Hayes is here. She'll see me. I really don't think... Please, just call up. If she says no, I'll leave, but let her make that choice. The guard studied him for a long moment, then picked up his phone and spoke quietly into it. Daniel couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw the guard's expression shift from skeptical to surprised. 15th floor, elevators are on your right. Daniel's hands were shaking as he rode the elevator up. What was he doing? What was he going to say? Sorry you're falling apart, but I'm here to... What? Fix her? Save her? Demand an explanation? The elevator doors opened onto a floor of modern offices, most dark and empty. But at the far end, light spilled from a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Portland skyline. Evelyn stood at those windows, her back to him, phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders, the rigid way she held herself. He walked toward her office, his work boots loud on the polished floors. She must have heard him coming because she ended her call and turned around. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the expanse of her office. She looked thinner than she had a week ago, her face drawn, dark circles under her eyes. But she was still beautiful. Still the woman who'd called him at midnight and changed everything. What are you doing here? Her voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Your CFO called me. Catherine had no right. She was worried about you. Said you've been self-destructing all week. Daniel stepped into the office, letting the door close behind him. Said you're about to turn down a massive acquisition offer because it's easier to cling to your company than to admit you made a mistake. Evelyn's jaw tightened. My business decisions are none of your concern. You're right, they're not. But you are my concern, whether you want to be or not. Daniel, we've been through this. It doesn't work. We don't work. Because you decided that in a panic and never gave me a chance to argue. What's to argue? You have a daughter. I have a company. We live in completely different worlds. But her voice lacked the conviction it had held on the phone. She sounded tired, defeated. So we bridge the worlds. People do it all the time. People who haven't built their entire identity around being strong and independent and not needing anyone. Evelyn turned back to the window. I don't know how to do this, Daniel. Don't know how to be vulnerable and open and all the things you deserve. Then learn. With me. He crossed the office until he was standing behind her, close enough to touch but not touching. You're brilliant enough to build a billion-dollar company. You're smart enough to figure out how to have a relationship. What if I'm not? What if I'm fundamentally broken in ways that mean I'll always choose work over people, safety over connection? She pressed her forehead against the glass. What if I hurt you again? Then you hurt me, and we deal with it together. That's not fair to you. Let me decide what's fair to me. Daniel gently turned her around to face him. Up close, he could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. Evelyn, I came here tonight not knowing what I'd find, not knowing if you'd even see me. But I came because a week without you felt like drowning, because my daughter told me that being scared and happy is better than being scared and alone, and because I think you're worth fighting for, even if you don't think so yourself. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. I'm so scared. Of this. Of you. Of caring about someone enough that losing them would break me. I know, I'm scared too. He cupped her face in his hands, wiped away the tears with his thumbs. But I'm also tired of letting fear make my decisions. Tired of playing it safe and calling it responsibility. I want to take the risk. With you. If you'll let me. I don't deserve you. That's not your call to make. Evelyn let out a wet laugh, leaning into his touch. You're supposed to be angry with me. Supposed to tell me to go to hell for the way I treated you. I was angry. I am angry. But I'm also here, because anger doesn't change what I feel. And what do you feel? Daniel took a breath, let himself say the words he'd been avoiding. I think I'm falling in love with you. Maybe already fell. And that terrifies me more than anything in my life ever has, because I know how much it hurts when someone you love walks away. But I'm tired of letting that fear stop me from having something real. Evelyn's eyes widened, fresh tears spilling over. You can't love me. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you cry when you're overwhelmed and use plumbing emergencies as excuses to not be alone. I know you're brilliant and driven and so afraid of being weak that you'd rather push away everyone who cares about you. I know you bought a plant because I told you to and kept a photo of my wrench on your phone. He smiled slightly. That's enough. How did you know about the photo? Catherine told me, right before she told me you were falling apart. I'm not falling apart. I'm just... She gestured helplessly at herself, at the office, at everything. Okay, I'm falling apart, but I'm doing it very professionally. Daniel laughed despite everything, pulling her into his arms. She resisted for half a second, then melted against him, her face buried in his chest. I'm sorry, she whispered, for ending it like that, for running, for being too scared to fight for something good. I know. I don't know how to do this, how to be in a relationship and run a company and not screw up both. Neither do I. But we'll figure it out, if you're willing to try. Evelyn pulled back enough to look up at him. What about Sophie? What about the fact that I work 80-hour weeks and travel constantly? What about all the very real logistical problems we were already worried about? We'll figure those out too. One at a time, together. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not promising it won't be messy, but I am saying I want to try. If you do. I do. I really, really do. She stood on her toes, pressed her lips to his in a kiss that tasted like tears and relief and new beginnings. When she pulled back, she was almost smiling. But we need ground rules, boundaries, actual discussions about how this works instead of just stumbling forward and hoping for the best. Okay, let's start now. Now? She glanced at her desk, at the stacks of papers, and her laptop still open. I have work. That can wait. This is more important. Daniel guided her to the couch in her office, sat down, and pulled her down next to him. Rule 1. We talk about everything. When we're scared, when we're overwhelmed, when we think we're making a mistake. No more running, no more ending things over the phone without discussion. Evelyn nodded. Okay, that's fair. Rule 2. Sophie comes first, always. I don't want to be this person who disrupts her life or makes her feel like she's competing for your attention. Agreed, but you should also know that Sophie already knows about you, and she told me I should fight for the things I want, so she's not opposed to this. She sounds wise beyond her years. She is, terrifyingly so. Daniel laced his fingers through Evelyn's. Rule 3. We're honest about what we can and can't give. You have a company to run. I have a business and a daughter. Neither of us can be everything to the other person, and that's okay. Rule 4, Evelyn added. We don't give up at the first sign of trouble. We committed to trying, which means actually trying, not bailing when things get hard. I can agree to that. They sat in silence for a moment, hands linked, both processing the enormity of what they were committing to. Then Evelyn shifted, curling into Daniel's side. I really am sorry, she said quietly, for the things I said. About you being a plumber, about us not fitting. I was looking for reasons to push you away because being close to you felt too dangerous. I know, and I'm sorry too, for deleting your number instead of fighting harder, for letting pride get in the way. We're both disasters. Yeah, but we're disasters together now. Evelyn laughed, the sound lighter than anything Daniel had heard from her all week. Together, that's going to take some getting used to. We have time. Do we? Because Monday I have to decide about this acquisition, and if I turn it down, the next few months are going to be insane. Board battles, investor pushback, probably working 100-hour weeks to prove I made the right choice. Are you going to turn it down? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Catherine thinks I should take it, that I've proven what I needed to prove and it's time to move on. But selling feels like admitting defeat. Like I sacrificed everything for this company, and if I sell it, what was it all for? Maybe it was for getting you to this point, where you have the choice, where you can decide what you actually want instead of what you think you should want. Evelyn considered this. What if what I want is to sell the company, take some time off, and figure out who I am when I'm not CEO Evelyn Carter? Then that's what you should do. Just like that? You wouldn't think I was wasting my potential or giving up? I'd think you were making a choice that serves your life instead of your resume. Daniel kissed the top of her head. And selfishly, I wouldn't mind having more of your time. Selfish looks good on you. She tilted her head up to look at him. Stay tonight, here. We can order food, talk more, figure out how this actually works. I can't. Sophie's home with Mrs. Chen, and I don't like being gone overnight without warning her. Right, of course. Evelyn sat up, putting distance between them. I understand. Hey. Daniel caught her hand before she could pull away completely. This is exactly what I meant about honesty. I want to stay, but I can't tonight because I have a responsibility at home. That doesn't mean I'm choosing Sophie over you. It means I'm being the parent she needs me to be. Can you understand that? Evelyn nodded slowly. I can. And I appreciate you being direct about it instead of making excuses. How about this? Come to dinner tomorrow night, at my place. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meeting Sophie properly. If we're doing this, she should know who you are. You want me to meet your daughter? The fear was back in Evelyn's eyes. Daniel, that's huge. What if she doesn't like me? What if I say something wrong? She'll like you, and you'll be fine. She's 8, not a board of directors. 8-year-olds are more intimidating than boards of directors. Boards of directors you can win over with data and strategy. 8-year-olds see right through you. Daniel smiled. Then it's good practice in being authentic, something we're both working on. Evelyn took a deep breath, visibly steeling herself. Okay, tomorrow night. Dinner with you and Sophie. I can do that. You can do that, Daniel agreed. He stood, pulling her up with him. And now I need to go before Mrs. Chen charges me overtime. Daniel? Evelyn caught his arm as he headed for the door. Thank you for coming tonight, for not giving up on me even when I gave you every reason to. Thank you for being worth it. He kissed her once more, soft and sweet and full of promise. Get some sleep, stop working. Go home to that plant and make sure it's still alive. The plant is fine. I've been watering it obsessively. Good. Keep doing that. It's good practice for taking care of things that need you, including myself, especially yourself. Daniel left her standing in her office, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her, but also more hopeful. The elevator ride down felt different than the ride up, lighter, like he'd set down a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. When he got home, Sophie was asleep, and Mrs. Chen was watching a Korean drama with subtitles. Everything okay? She asked, looking up as he entered. Yeah, Actually, everything might be okay. He paid her, added an extra 20 for the late hour, and walked her to the door. Mrs. Chen, thank you for everything, for watching Sophie, for being patient with me, for not asking questions when I'm clearly a mess. Mrs. Chen patted his arm with a knowing smile. You good man, Danny. You deserve good things. I'm happy for you. After she left, Daniel checked on Sophie one more time, then collapsed on his own bed, emotionally exhausted but strangely at peace. Tomorrow, Evelyn would meet his daughter. Tomorrow, they'd take the next step in figuring out how to make this impossible thing work. But tonight, he'd fought for something he wanted and won, and that felt like its own kind of victory. His phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize but instantly knew. The plant is still alive. And so am I. Thank you for reminding me that's enough. Daniel smiled at his phone and typed back, It's more than enough. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she confirmed. I'm terrified. Me too. But we're doing it anyway. That seems to be our pattern. Could be worse patterns to have. A pause, then, Daniel? I think I might be falling in love with you too, just so you know. His heart did something complicated in his chest. I know. Sleep well, Evelyn. You too. Daniel set his phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, feeling the full weight of what they were attempting. A relationship between two people who'd spent years building walls. A blended life between a CEO and a plumber. A new beginning built on midnight phone calls and broken pipes and the stubborn refusal to let fear win. It was messy and complicated and absolutely terrifying. It was also the most real thing he'd felt in years. And for the first time since his marriage had ended, Daniel Hayes allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. This time would last. This time would be enough. Morning came too early, but Daniel woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. Today, Evelyn would meet Sophie. Today, they'd start building something real instead of theoretical. Today, everything would either come together or fall spectacularly apart. He made pancakes for breakfast. Sophie's favorite, shaped like dinosaurs because she'd never outgrown that phase, and tried to figure out how to explain that a woman would be joining them for dinner. Sophie solved the problem for him by looking up from her orange juice and saying, Is your friend coming over today? The one who makes you smile? Daniel flipped a pancake, buying himself a moment. How did you know? You've been cleaning all morning. You only clean like that when someone important is coming. She took a bite of her brontosaurus. Plus you're nervous. You keep checking your phone. When did you become so observant? I've always been observant. You just don't always notice. Sophie grinned at him. So is she? Coming over? Yeah, for dinner tonight, if that's okay with you. Why wouldn't it be okay? I said you should see your friend. She paused, suddenly serious. Is she nice to you? Emma's mom says that's the most important thing, that people should be nice to each other. Daniel sat down across from his daughter, overwhelmed by her wisdom. She's very nice to me, and I think you'll like her. But if you don't, or if this feels weird, you can tell me. Your feelings matter more than anything else. Dad, I want you to be happy. If she makes you happy, then I want to meet her. Sophie reached across the table and patted his hand in a gesture so adult it made his heart ache. But maybe don't make dinosaur pancakes for dinner. That might be trying too hard. Daniel laughed, the tension in his chest easing slightly. Noted. Regular spaghetti it is. And garlic bread. Everyone likes garlic bread. You're absolutely right. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Daniel worked 2 service calls, both straightforward repairs that required minimal thought, leaving his brain free to spiral through every possible scenario for the evening. What if Sophie hated Evelyn? What if Evelyn said something wrong and Sophie shut down? What if the whole thing was a disaster and he'd ruined both relationships in one ill-conceived dinner? His phone buzzed at 2 p.m. So with a text from Evelyn. What should I bring? Wine? Dessert? Flowers? All of the above? I'm spiraling. He smiled despite his own anxiety. Just yourself. And maybe lower your expectations. It's just spaghetti in a small apartment, not a dinner party. I don't know how to do casual. My brain only has 2 settings, business meeting and crisis mode. Then pick whichever feels less terrifying and go with that. Neither feels less terrifying. I'm meeting your daughter, Daniel. This is huge. It is. But she's 8, not a venture capitalist. Just be yourself. What if myself isn't good enough? Daniel stopped what he was doing, called her instead of texting back. She answered on the first ring. You're good enough, he said before she could speak. You're more than good enough. And Sophie already wants to like you because you make me happy. So take a breath, stop overthinking, and trust that this will be okay. You sound very confident for someone who was just as nervous this morning. Sophie told me I was trying too hard. Apparently 8-year-olds have better perspective than either of us. Evelyn laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. Okay, I'll be there at 6. Just me, no wine, no flowers, no trying too hard. Perfect. See you then. Daniel, thank you for being patient with my anxiety. Always. He hung up and finished his service call, then headed home to start dinner preparations. Sophie helped him make the sauce from scratch, carefully chopping basil while he browned the meat, both of them falling into the easy rhythm of cooking together that they developed over years of just the 2 of them dinners. What's she like? Sophie asked as she stirred the pot. Your friend. Her name is Evelyn, and she's complicated, smart and driven, and sometimes a little scared of things that shouldn't be scary. Like meeting me? Exactly like meeting you. Sophie considered this. That's silly. I'm not scary. You're terrifying. You see right through people. Only because most people aren't very good at hiding things. She added the basil to the sauce, watching it wilt in the heat. Is she pretty? Very, but that's not why I like her. Why do you like her? Daniel thought about how to explain Evelyn to an 8-year-old, how to articulate the way she'd slipped past his defenses and made him feel seen, how being with her felt like finally exhaling after holding his breath for years. She makes me feel less alone, he said finally, like I can be myself, messy parts and all, and she won't judge me for it, and I think I do the same for her. Sophie nodded sagely. That's good. Being alone is the worst. You're never alone, sweetheart. You have me. I know, but you've been alone even when I'm here. I can tell. She looked up at him with those 2 knowing eyes. I'm glad you're not anymore. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Daniel took a breath, wiped his hands on a towel, and opened the door. Evelyn stood on his doorstep looking nothing like the CEO he'd met in her pristine house or the put-together woman in her office. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, minimal makeup, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked young and nervous and absolutely beautiful. Hi, she said. Hi, Sam. Daniel stepped aside to let her in. Come on in. Sophie's in the kitchen finishing the garlic bread. Evelyn clutched her purse like a lifeline as she entered his small apartment. He watched her take in the space, the worn furniture, the photos of Sophie on every surface, the homework papers stuck to the fridge with magnets, the lived-in chaos of an actual home. It's perfect, she said quietly, and he could tell she meant it. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a towel that was nearly as big as she was. She studied Evelyn with open curiosity, no shyness or hesitation. You're Evelyn, she said. Statement, not question. I am, and you're Sophie. Your dad talks about you constantly. Good things, I hope. The best things. He's very proud of you. Sophie beamed at this, then gestured toward the kitchen. Do you like spaghetti? Dad made a special sauce. It has a secret ingredient, but he won't tell me what it is. I love spaghetti, Evelyn said, relaxing slightly under Sophie's easy acceptance. And I'm very good at keeping secrets. It's fennel seed, Sophie stage whispered. I figured it out last year, but I pretend I don't know because it makes him happy to think he has a secret. Daniel laughed despite himself. Traitor. You love me anyway. Sophie grabbed Evelyn's hand with the casual confidence of a child who'd never learned to fear strangers. Come on, you can help me set the table. Dad always makes me do it, but if you're here, it's more fair if we both help. Evelyn shot Daniel a helpless look over her shoulder as Sophie dragged her toward the kitchen. He just shrugged and followed, watching as his daughter orchestrated the dinner preparations like a tiny general. The meal itself was easier than Daniel had dared hope. Sophie peppered Evelyn with questions. What kind of work did she do? Had she ever been to Disneyland? Did she like dogs or cats better? What was her favorite color? And Evelyn answered each one with genuine interest, treating Sophie like an adult worth talking to rather than a child to be patronized. My dad says you run a big company, Sophie said around a mouthful of spaghetti. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm in charge of a lot of people who build computer software that helps doctors and nurses take better care of sick people, Evelyn explained. We make programs that keep track of medical information so nothing gets lost or forgotten. That sounds important. It is. Or at least it has been. Evelyn glanced at Daniel. I'm actually thinking about selling the company, letting someone else run it while I figure out what I want to do next. What do you want to do? Sophie asked. I'm not sure yet. Maybe go back to school, maybe travel, maybe just take some time to figure out who I am when I'm not working all the time. You should definitely travel. Dad never takes me anywhere cool because he's always working too. Sophie pointed her fork at Daniel. You guys could travel together. Then you'd both have someone to go with. Evelyn laughed, the sound warm and genuine. That's an excellent idea. Where should we go? Hawaii. Everyone should go to Hawaii at least once. Emma went last year and said the beaches are amazing. Hawaii it is then. Someday. The word someday hung in the air, full of possibility and promise. Daniel caught Evelyn's eye across the table and saw the same hope reflected there that he felt blooming in his chest. After dinner, Sophie insisted on showing Evelyn her room, specifically the elaborate marine biology display she'd been working on for months. Daniel cleaned up the kitchen and listened to their voices drifting from down the hall, Sophie's excited chatter, and Evelyn's thoughtful questions blending into a harmony that made his throat tight with emotion. They emerged 20 minutes later with Sophie clutching a book about octopuses that Evelyn had apparently promised to borrow and read. Evelyn says octopuses are actually really smart and can solve puzzles, Sophie announced. Did you know they have 3 hearts? I did not know that, Daniel said. Well, now you do. I'm going to finish my homework so I can read more about them before bed. Sophie hugged Daniel, then surprised both adults by hugging Evelyn too. Thanks for coming to dinner. You should come back soon. I'd like that very much, Evelyn said, her voice slightly thick. Sophie disappeared into her room, leaving Daniel and Evelyn alone in the living room. Evelyn sank onto the couch, looking emotionally wrung out. She's amazing, Evelyn said. Smart and kind and so confident. You've done an incredible job with her. Thank you. She liked you too. I could tell. How could you tell? She hugged you. She doesn't hug people she doesn't trust. Daniel sat down next to her, close but not touching. So that's my life. A small apartment, precocious daughter, spaghetti dinners. Still think we can make this work? Evelyn turned to face him fully. I think I want to make this work more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. Your life, this apartment, Sophie, it's real. It's warm. It's everything mine isn't. Your life can be that too, if you let it. I'm starting to believe that. Actually, I need to tell you something. She took a breath. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about making choices that serve my life instead of my resume, and I've decided to take the acquisition offer. Daniel felt his eyebrows rise. You're selling the company? I'm selling the company. Catherine's right. I've proven what I needed to prove, and holding on to it just to avoid facing what comes next isn't a good enough reason anymore. She laced her fingers through his. The deal closes in 6 weeks. After that, I'll have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes and absolutely no idea what to do with myself. That sounds terrifying. It is, but also kind of exciting. For the first time in 15 years, I get to choose what my life looks like. No investors to answer to, no board meetings, no employees depending on my decisions. She paused. I could take that trip to Hawaii, or go to medical school like I always wanted, or just take some time to figure out who Evelyn Carter is when she's not CEO Evelyn Carter. All of those sound good. There's one more thing I'm considering. What's that? Evelyn looked down at their joined hands. Moving. My house has never felt like home. It's just a place I sleep between obligations. But maybe somewhere smaller, somewhere with actual personality, somewhere I could build a real life instead of just existing. She trailed off, clearly nervous about his reaction. Daniel's heart was pounding. Somewhere like where? I don't know, somewhere with good schools maybe. In case I ever wanted to spend time with someone who has a daughter who needs to be near her school and her friends. She finally met his eyes. I'm not saying I'd move in with you. That's way too fast. But maybe the same neighborhood? Close enough that this doesn't require hour-long drives and complicated scheduling? You'd do that? Give up your house in the West Hills? It's not giving up anything. It's choosing something better. She squeezed his hand. I'm tired of living a life that looks good on paper but feels empty. I want messy and real and complicated. I want Sunday dinners and homework help, and someone who actually cares if I come home at night. I want this, Daniel. You and Sophie, and whatever we can build together. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and feeling the solid reality of her against him. This was happening. This brilliant, complicated woman was choosing him, choosing them. We'll take it slow, he said into her hair. Figure it out as we go. No pressure, no expectations beyond honesty and trying. Slow sounds good. Trying sounds better. Evelyn pulled back to look at him. I'm still going to mess this up sometimes, still going to panic and overthink and probably try to run when things get hard. And I'll be there to talk you down, to remind you that you're worth fighting for, to not let you disappear into work or fear or whatever defense mechanism feels safest. That's a lot to promise. I know, but I'm promising it anyway. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped up in each other, the sound of Sophie's music drifting from her room. This was what Daniel had been missing, not just physical closeness, but emotional intimacy. Someone who knew his flaws and stayed anyway. Someone who let him see her flaws and trusted he wouldn't leave. When do you tell Sophie? Evelyn asked eventually. About us being, what are we exactly? I don't think we ever defined it. Together. We're together. Daniel said it with certainty. As for Sophie, she already knows. She's 8, not oblivious. She's been rooting for us since before there was an us to root for. She really is terrifyingly perceptive. Wait until you see her in action at the school play. She's the narrator, which basically means she gets to boss everyone around and call it acting. When is it? 2 weeks from Friday. You should come, if you want to. I want to. I'll put it on my calendar. Evelyn smiled. Look at me, planning my schedule around a school play. 6 weeks ago I would have said I was too busy. And now? Now I'm realizing busy was just another word for avoiding life. She stood, pulling him up with her. I should go. Let you get Sophie to bed and get some sleep yourself. Daniel walked her to the door, reluctant to let her leave, even though he knew she was right. At the threshold, he pulled her close one more time. Thank you, he said, for taking the chance, for being brave enough to try. Thank you for not giving up on me, for fighting when I was too scared to fight for myself. She kissed him softly. I'll call you tomorrow? You better. He watched her drive away, then went to check on Sophie. She was supposed to be doing homework, but was clearly reading the octopus book instead. I like her, Sophie announced without looking up. She's smart, and she listens when people talk, and she didn't treat me like a baby. I like her too. Is she going to be your girlfriend? Like, officially? Yeah, I think she is. Sophie set down her book and looked at him seriously. Does that mean she might be around a lot? Like part of our family? Daniel sat down on the edge of her bed. Maybe, eventually, if things work out. Would that be okay with you? Will she try to be my new mom? No, you have a mom, even if she's not around much. Evelyn would just be Evelyn. Someone who cares about both of us. someone who might become important to our family. Sophie thought about this for a long moment. Okay, I can work with that, but Dad, yeah? Don't mess this up. She's a good one. Daniel laughed, overwhelmed by his daughter's straightforward wisdom. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can do. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of normalcy and adjustment. Evelyn came for dinner twice more, each time fitting more naturally into the rhythm of their household. She helped Sophie practice her lines for the play, attended a plumbing supply run with Daniel just to spend time together, and slowly started making the transition from CEO to something undefined and open to possibility. The acquisition deal moved forward smoothly. Evelyn worked closely with Catherine to ensure the transition would be seamless, that her employees would be taken care of, that the company she'd built would continue thriving under new ownership. And slowly, Daniel watched her let go of the identity she'd clung to for so long. I put my house on the market, she told him one evening as they sat on his couch after Sophie had gone to bed. My realtor says it'll sell within a week. Apparently, pristine houses in the West Hills go fast. Where will you go? I found a rental. Small house about 10 minutes from here. 2 bedrooms. Actual yard. Needs some work but has good bones. She smiled. The landlord said I could paint and make changes. Apparently he likes tenants who actually care about the place. 2 bedrooms? One for me, one for an office, or a guest room, or whatever I need it to be. She paused. I thought about getting a 1-bedroom, but Sophie mentioned she might want to have sleepovers sometime, and I wanted space in case someday we needed it. Daniel's heart did that complicated thing again. Someday. I'm learning to believe in someday. It's terrifying. But you're doing it anyway. I'm doing it anyway. The night of the school play arrived with typical Portland rain. Daniel and Evelyn sat in the packed auditorium, surrounded by other parents with cameras and proud smiles. Sophie stood backstage with the other performers, probably bossing everyone around and making sure they knew their cues. I'm nervous for her, Evelyn whispered as the lights dimmed. Is that normal? Completely normal. Welcome to parenthood-adjacent anxiety. The play was exactly what a 4th-grade production should be. Slightly chaotic, overly enthusiastic, with a few missed lines and a painted backdrop that looked like it might fall over at any moment. But Sophie was magnificent, narrating the story with clear projection and perfect timing, her confidence radiating across the stage. During intermission, Evelyn turned to Daniel with tears in her eyes. She's so talented, so brave up there. She gets it from her grandfather. The man who raised me for a few years was a natural performer. Used to say the only way to beat fear was to face it head on. Smart man. He was. After the play, they waited in the lobby while Sophie changed out of her costume. Other parents milled around, chatting and congratulating each other. Daniel noticed a few curious looks directed their way, probably wondering who the well-dressed woman was standing so close to the single dad plumber. He didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them see that his life was more complicated and richer than they'd assumed. Sophie burst through the backstage door, still buzzing with adrenaline, and launched herself at Daniel. Did you see? Did you see? I didn't mess up any of my lines. You were perfect, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Sophie turned to Evelyn. What did you think? Be honest. I think you're a natural. The way you commanded that stage. You weren't just reading lines. You were telling a story. That's real talent. Sophie glowed under the praise, then was pulled away by Emma and her mother, leaving Daniel and Evelyn alone again. This is nice, Evelyn said quietly. Being part of this. Part of her life. Part of your life. It's just a school play. It's not just anything. It's real. It's what families do. She leaned against him. I never thought I'd have this. The domestic stuff, the school events, the feeling of belonging somewhere. And now? Now I can't imagine wanting anything else. They drove home separately. Evelyn to her rental house, which she'd moved into the week before, and Daniel and Sophie to their apartment. But the separation felt temporary now, not permanent. Just a matter of logistics and timing, not fundamental incompatibility. Sophie fell asleep in the truck, exhausted from the adrenaline crash. Daniel carried her inside, tucked her into bed still in her clothes because some battles weren't worth fighting, and checked his phone. A text from Evelyn. Thank you for letting me be part of tonight. It meant more than you know. He replied, "Thank you for wanting to be part of it. You fit, Evelyn. With us. With this life. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." Tomorrow was the closing of the acquisition. The final signatures that would make Evelyn a very wealthy woman with no company to run and unlimited possibility ahead of her. "I'm terrified," she texted back. "I know, but you're doing it anyway. That's what matters. Will you be there? When I sign the papers?" Daniel paused, surprised by the request. "Do you want me there?" "Yes. I know it's a business thing and probably boring, but I'd really like you to be there, if you can." He checked his schedule. 2 service calls in the morning, but he could move them. "I'll be there." "What time?" 2 p.m. At the Carter Technologies office. Catherine's coordinating everything. "I'll be there," he promised. The next day, Daniel put on his best shirt, which wasn't saying much, and drove to the gleaming office building downtown. Catherine met him in the lobby, looking him up and down with barely concealed amusement. "So you're Daniel Hayes, the plumber who managed to break through Evelyn's walls." "That's me." "She's been like a different person since you came back into her life. Lighter, more human." Catherine extended her hand. "Thank you for that. I didn't do anything except refuse to let her push me away. Sometimes that's everything." Catherine led him to the elevator. "Fair warning, there are a lot of lawyers up there, venture capitalists, people in very expensive suits. You might feel out of place." "I usually do." "Good. Then you won't be surprised." She smiled. "Evelyn's in the conference room. She's been checking her phone every 2 minutes, waiting for you." Daniel found Evelyn exactly where Catherine said she'd be, surrounded by men in suits and stacks of legal documents. She looked up when he entered, and her whole face transformed with relief. "You came." "Of course I came." She excused herself from the lawyers, crossed the room, and took his hand. "I know this is weird, having you here for a business deal. But I needed someone who was on my side for me, not for the money or the company or what this means for their portfolio. I'm always on your side." The signing took an hour, document after document, initials and signatures, lawyers droning through clauses and conditions. Daniel sat in a chair against the wall and watched Evelyn methodically sign away the company she'd built from nothing, watched her let go of the identity she'd clung to for 15 years, and watched her look lighter with each signature, like she was setting down weight she'd carried for too long. When it was finally done, the lawyers shook hands, the venture capitalist congratulated her on a successful exit, and Catherine pulled her into a hug that spoke of years of partnership and friendship. "You did it," Catherine said. "You built something extraordinary, and now you get to decide what's next." "I have no idea what's next." "Good. That means it can be anything." Everyone filed out eventually, leaving just Daniel and Evelyn in the conference room with its view of Portland spread below them. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked. Evelyn looked around the room that had been her second home for years. "Free, terrified, relieved. All of it." She turned to him. "I just sold my company for $800 million. I should feel triumphant or devastated or something big. Instead, I just feel ready." "Ready for what?" "For whatever comes next. For building a life instead of a resume. For taking chances and making mistakes and being okay with not having all the answers." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. "For this. For us. For seeing where it goes without fear stopping me." Daniel held her close, feeling the significance of the moment. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For both of them. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "Now we go pick up Sophie from school and take her to get ice cream to celebrate. Then we go home, to whichever home makes sense tonight, and we just live. Together. Messy and imperfect and real." "That sounds perfect." They left the Carter Technologies building hand in hand, Evelyn Carter, who was no longer a CEO, and Daniel Hayes, who was still a plumber, but also so much more than that. They picked up Sophie, who shrieked with joy at the prospect of ice cream on a school day. They sat in a booth at Sophie's favorite ice cream place and talked about everything and nothing while Sophie demolished a sundae the size of her head. "Are you rich now?" Sophie asked Evelyn between bites. "Since you sold your company?" "Sophie," Daniel said, mortified. "What? It's a fair question. Emma's mom says it's good to be direct about money. Evelyn laughed. Yes, I'm rich now, very rich, but that doesn't really change anything important. What about the unimportant stuff? Well, I can afford to take us all to Hawaii now, if your dad can take time off work. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really? You mean it? I mean it. Maybe this summer, if we can figure out the logistics. Dad, did you hear that? We're going to Hawaii. Daniel looked at Evelyn over his daughter's head, saw the hope and happiness in her eyes, and felt something settle in his chest. This was his life now. This complicated, beautiful, messy thing they were building together. I heard, he said. Sounds like an adventure. Adventures are good, Sophie declared. Everybody should have adventures. That night, after they dropped Sophie at home with Mrs. Chen for a few hours, Daniel and Evelyn drove to her new rental house. It was small and ordinary, with rooms that needed paint and floors that creaked, but it felt warm in a way her pristine West Hills house never had. I bought furniture, Evelyn said, gesturing around. Real furniture that I actually like instead of designer pieces that look good in magazines. And I hung pictures. And I bought plants, 6 of them. The woman at the nursery said I was ambitious, but I figured if I can run a company, I can keep 6 plants alive. Daniel looked around at the evidence of Evelyn actually building a life. Pictures of her family, of Sophie's play, of the 2 of them at dinner, plants on every windowsill, books stacked on tables, a throw blanket draped over the couch that looked soft and inviting. It's perfect, he said. It's home. Or it's starting to feel like home. She took his hand. You know what's missing, though? What? You. Here. Not all the time. I know that's too fast and Sophie needs stability and we're taking things slow, but sometimes, mornings when you don't have early calls, evenings when Sophie's at Emma's house, weekends when we can just be together without rushing. I'd like that. Yeah? Yeah. Daniel pulled her close, kissed her slowly. I'd like that a lot. They spent the evening talking and planning and imagining futures that felt possible instead of impossible. Evelyn showed him her ideas for the second bedroom. Maybe an office, maybe a space for Sophie when she stayed over, maybe both. They looked at travel websites and talked about Hawaii and medical school and all the things Evelyn might want to do now that her time was her own. And slowly, Daniel felt the last of his defenses crumble. This woman who'd called him at midnight, who'd made up plumbing emergencies just to not be alone, who'd been terrified of vulnerability. She was his now, and he was hers. Messy and complicated and absolutely worth it. I love you, he said sometime around midnight, the words slipping out naturally. I know it's fast and probably too soon to say it, but I love you, Evelyn Carter. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I love you too. Have loved you since the faux restaurant, maybe. Since you told me I wasn't pathetic for being lonely. Since you saw me at my worst and didn't run. I almost did run, when you ended things. But you came back. You fought for me when I was too scared to fight for myself. She wiped her eyes. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. You deserve everything good. You just had to learn to believe it. I'm learning. With your help. They fell asleep on her new couch, wrapped up in each other in the throw blanket that smelled like fresh laundry. And when Daniel woke up at 3 a.m. and realized he needed to get home to Sophie, Evelyn walked him to the door with messy hair and sleepy eyes and kissed him goodbye like it wasn't goodbye at all. Just see you tomorrow. The months that followed weren't perfect. There were arguments about time and schedules and how to blend their lives without losing themselves. There were moments when Evelyn's old fears resurfaced and she tried to pull away, and moments when Daniel's walls went back up to protect himself from potential hurt. There were logistics to navigate around Sophie's needs and Evelyn's transition to a life without constant work. But there were also mornings in Evelyn's sunny kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the news together. School events where Evelyn sat with Daniel and cheered for Sophie like she'd been doing it for years. Weekends at the coast, teaching Sophie to find tide pools while Evelyn took pictures on her phone. Quiet evenings on the couch while Sophie did homework and Daniel fixed the leaky faucet. Evelyn's rental actually did have, and Evelyn read medical school prerequisites because she'd decided to actually do it, to chase the dream she'd set aside 15 years ago. Sophie thrived with the addition of Evelyn in her life. She had someone else to talk to about marine biology, someone who asked questions and actually listened to the answers. She had a role model who showed her that women could be brilliant and vulnerable, strong and scared, successful and still learning. And Daniel found himself building a life that felt full instead of just functional. He still worked, still fixed pipes and cleared drains and built his business one service call at a time. But now he also had someone to come home to who understood that work was just one part of life, not the whole thing. Someone who reminded him to take breaks and make time for joy, and that being needed wasn't the same as being valued. The Hawaii trip happened that summer. 10 days of beaches and snorkeling and watching Sophie discover the ocean in all its complexity. Evelyn had booked a house instead of a hotel, wanting the space to feel like family instead of vacation. And somewhere between teaching Sophie to paddleboard and walking on the beach at sunset, Daniel realized this was what happy looked like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and rich and worth every complicated moment. On their last night, after Sophie had fallen asleep exhausted from a full day of swimming, Daniel and Evelyn sat on the lanai watching the stars. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said quietly, "about next steps, about what I want my life to look like. And I start medical school in the fall. Pre-med classes first, obviously, since it's been 15 years since I took biology. But I'm doing it, actually pursuing the thing I gave up on. I'm proud of you. I'm terrified. I'll be the oldest person in most of my classes. I'll be starting over in a field where I have no experience or connections. You built $1 billion company. You can handle some pre-med classes." She laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds less terrifying." She paused. "There's something else I've been thinking about." "What's that?" "Us. Where this is going. What it looks like long term." She turned to face him. "I know we said we'd take it slow, and we have been. But I'm tired of slow, Daniel. I'm tired of maintaining 2 households and coordinating schedules and pretending this is anything other than what it is." Daniel's heart started pounding. "What is it?" "Home. You and Sophie are home. And I want to make that official. I want to wake up in the same house every morning. I want to be there for school pickups and homework help and regular life, not just the special occasions." She took a breath. "I want to be part of your family, really part of it, if you'll have me." "Are you asking to move in?" "I'm asking if you'd consider looking for a place together. Something big enough for all of us, with a yard for Sophie and space for my studying and room for your tools. A real home that we build together instead of me just fitting into your life or you fitting into mine." Daniel thought about his small apartment, the life he'd carefully constructed to be manageable and controlled. Thought about how Evelyn had blown through all of that and made everything more complicated and infinitely better. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes? Yes, let's find a place together. Yes, let's build something real. Yes to all of it." He pulled her close. "I love you, Evelyn, and I want every complicated, messy, beautiful moment we can build together." She kissed him, tasting like salt air and happiness and new beginnings. "We're really doing this. We're really doing this." Sophie's going to have opinions about the house. Sophie has opinions about everything. Good. She should. We want her input. They found a house that fall. A Craftsman in Southeast Portland with 3 bedrooms, a real yard, and enough space for all of them to spread out without feeling cramped. Sophie got to pick her room and paint it the exact shade of ocean blue she wanted. Evelyn set up a study space for her medical school work. Daniel converted the garage into a proper workshop, and slowly, they built a life that looked nothing like what any of them had planned and everything like what they needed. Evelyn started her pre-med classes and discovered she loved being challenged again, loved learning for the sake of learning instead of for business advantage. Daniel's business grew steadily, and he hired an assistant so he could actually take time off without guilt. Sophie flourished with the stability of 2 adults who loved her and each other, who showed her what healthy relationships looked like. There were still hard days. Days when Evelyn's fear of abandonment surfaced and she picked fights about nothing. Days when Daniel's walls went up and he shut down instead of talking. Days when they both wondered if they'd made a mistake, if the differences between them were too great, if love was actually enough. But they kept showing up, kept choosing each other, kept working through the hard stuff, because what they'd built was worth fighting for. 2 years after that first midnight phone call, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in their shared home, Daniel found Evelyn sitting on their back porch with a cup of tea and a textbook. "Studying?" he asked. "Taking a break. Anatomy is kicking my ass. She set the book aside. "How was your day?" "Fix Mrs. Chen's disposal. She tried to pay me with homemade dumplings. Did you accept?" "Of course. They're in the fridge." He sat down next to her. "Sophie's at Emma's working on their science project. Won't be home until 8. So we have the house to ourselves for a few hours." "We do." Evelyn leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the Portland sky fade from blue to gold to purple. This was their life now. Ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were sharing them. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Evelyn asked. "When I called you at midnight because I couldn't handle a leaky pipe?" "All the time." "Do you wish you hadn't answered?" Daniel thought about the question, thought about how much easier his life would have been if he'd let that call go to voicemail. How much less complicated, how much safer. "Not for a second," he said. "Best decision I ever made. Even though I put you through hell, even though, you were worth it. This is worth it." He kissed the top of her head. "We're worth it." Evelyn turned in his arms, looked up at him with those dark eyes that had first caught him in her pristine kitchen 2 years ago. But they weren't scared anymore, just certain. "I love you, Daniel Hayes. Thank you for not giving up on me." "I love you too. Thank you for being brave enough to try." The porch light flickered on automatically as the evening deepened into night. Not as a signal or a mistake, but as something simple and right. A quiet acknowledgement that some connections couldn't be fixed because they were never broken in the first place, just waiting to be understood. And in that warm glow, with Evelyn in his arms, and their life stretched out around them in all its messy, complicated beauty, Daniel Hayes knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. Some things couldn't be fixed. Some things could only be built, slowly, carefully, one honest moment at a time. And sometimes, when you stop trying to control everything and just let yourself feel, you discovered that broken pipes and midnight calls and lonely people reaching out in the dark could lead to something more real and lasting than anything you could have planned. Home wasn't a place. It was the people who saw you at your worst and chose to stay anyway. It was showing up, being honest, fighting through the fear. It was this. It had always been this. And it was enough.